Yoshida.
This is Fern Halls.
And you are listening to Aetheryte Radio.
Aetheryte Radio.
Here we go.
Hi. My openings aren't as good as Fusion's, but here we are, and this is Aetheryte Radio, Gamerscape's Final Fantasy XIV podcast. I'm Sinidra, and today I have my two lovely friends, Alduno, the totally tubular Alduno, and the really radical Rook. Ooh, that one had, complete alliteration.
Are we doing, a 90s grunge episode? Or,
Yes.
90s TV show episode? What's happening?
I just decided. And we also have our guest, the lovely Rin. Thank you for joining us.
Hey.
Yes!
Perfect,
Oh my god,
perfect,
right
yes!
on theme.
Yeah.
My hero. And that's it. That's the show.
That's
it
it.
was
We're
amazing, and we're done.
We'll see you later.
That's all we prepared for today.
Yep.
But no, I'm kidding. We got a lot more to go, a whole lot.
All right, we got a little bit of news as we normally do. We got the live letter from the producer live. Oh my gosh, I don't know the real number. LXX3.
73. Those are letters.
Yeah, that's
Lizzie.
50 10 10 70 1113. Awesome. That's how we do Roman numerals.
Look, my name has Roman numerals in it, so I gotta know.
That is set for October 7th, 9:30 to 11:30 p.m. PDT, which is a very different time. And it is going to be during the next 14-hour broadcast, which I assume starts significantly before that.
It's about an hour before, I think.
Oh, not significantly before.
Yeah, not too much. Yeah, it's like prime time, almost. But yeah, they're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff. Like there's Hironobu Sakaguchi talking to Yoshi. I can't wait for that. That's at the end, so the next morning. But yeah, that live letter. Oh, I can't wait to hear what they talk about in it.
Give us Criterion information.
Yes, please.
Yes, I can't wait, please.
Probably more apologies also.
Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of that, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And as far as I know, that's really it as far as news.
Yeah.
Anybody else seen anything else on that?
There's
Generation
some
Superhighway?
There's some merch.
New merch, yeah.
Yeah.
The
We're gonna talk
Elpis
about it.
flower.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful, but it costs
It's
just as
gorgeous.
much to ship it as it does to buy it.
It's way too expensive. I had that thing in my cart. It was there. I was like, I have to get this fast. It's going to sell out. Oh my God. $45, which in my mind is a stretch to begin with for a plastic flower that lights up. But I was going to do it. And then they were like, okay, with shipping, this is $70. And I was like, no, it isn't. You can keep this. Goodbye.
The Paladin jacket was a lot more.
Oh, yeah. That
It's
Paladin
good, though.
jacket.
I liked the jacket.
I will like it when it comes in.
Oh, yeah, you got one?
No. Yes. Of course. Of
ashamed.
course.
Don't be ashamed.
You
It's
got
the
to.
best part about Paladin all expansion.
Fair. Fair.
I mean, I like the magic swords. Can I advocate at least for swords on swords on swords, which I'm into? But the rest, yeah, fair.
If they had a little cube, right? That was like a nightlight, and it just did the animations of the Blade of Faith, Truth, and Valor.
That'd be cool.
And then we could hack it to do ones that we actually care about.
Didn't you just say
Care
wow
about
to him?
it.
I care about it.
I did.
Wow, we're going to
but,
be spicy today, people.
Yeah, no, I hope so.
Yes, we will. Don't worry.
All right, then let's do this. Let's get right into the stuff.
Yeah, but right before we do, though, I do want to say, Ren, we're so happy that you could join us. Of course, absolutely, we, at the end, we'll have a moment, we pitch everything in the whole world. But for anybody who doesn't know, Ren Karagani, who's here with us today, awesome. It's been so fun getting to have the chance to cast with you when we've been doing Wolves League stuff, but also just to be on stream teams with you and to have known you so long in the space. Ren, do you want to just share really fast a little bit about the kind of things that you do on Twitch as we get ready to go into this full-on balance discussion?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rin. I like to play Final Fantasy XIV online.
Nailed it.
I like-
Okay,
Me
cool.
too. Oh my God.
I like to teach Savage and Ultimate raids. We take part of progression when it comes out at first, and then optimization throughout the tiers. You might find me on the balance as a mentor for tanks. I teach Gunbreaker to people, and we have a really good time. Sometimes we branch out and do some variety games for the community, but for the most part, Like Rook was saying, we also do like shoutcasting on PvP and stuff, which has been an absolute blast. PvP can be a lot of fun if you give it a try. But that's not today's show. We're talking about job balance in the game, and we have a lot of things to talk about because we care a lot about really all ends of the game. This affects players in the casual mindset and the hardcore mindset and everything in between.
Indeed.
Exactly.
Indeed. I'm going to do something unprecedented. It's not really unprecedented at all. I'm going to say, hey, Charles.
Yeah.
This is your outline. You want to walk
Yeah.
us through it?
No, I've never seen it before. So what we're going to start with is the developer communication we've gotten recently. So we got the raid tier, which was everybody said it was a mistake and we never should have done it. So that's fine. It's going well. No, I'm kidding. It's a great raid tier. There's some fun fights, but there was a little tiny bit of a problem in P8S that they wanted to tell us about. So with patch 6.21, we got the second HP nerf in the history of the game, I believe, that we know of.
So, like
Vortexer was before.
Yeah, one where it was right at the beginning because there was an issue versus like later on down the line where they're like, this isn't really content anymore. We'll make it easier.
Right. So what happened here, or the explanation from the devs, was that they were testing it out, they were balancing it, and I'll just talk about what they said in this first one so that we can go through the whole kind of reaction. So in this first one, they just said, hey, it was about 1% too high. We've adjusted that. We're sorry. These things happen. But they kind of said our testing team got too good, and a lot of people in the community took that as, you guys aren't as good as we are. That's not at all what they were talking about. Like, that was that immediate response. And most people were like, no, be reasonable. That's not what they're saying. But that came out first, so it kind of felt weird. I don't know. Did you guys see any of that reaction or feel it in your community?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
100%.
it's been a long-running thing in games, right? That the way that developers play the game is different than we as players play it, right? This is just a thing that forever will be the truth, because developers are working on many things outside of actually sitting down and playing. So when it comes to, this kind of discussion about like, our team got really good.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this is just that they are, even the testing teams and the QA teams that help support this, right? Over the course of their work, they test out many, many different things. They are not just dedicated to optimization of endgame like certain players may be. They are not just dedicated to any one thing, but as is the nature of a lot of stuff over time, as you raid or do this kind of content with anybody and get familiar with the game, your skill ceiling, goes. Like you grow in your skill. So the idea, I think, here was that the normal percentages that they usually adjust to add onto based off of the testing of their own teams is usually a little bit higher, because they know that with dedicated raiders, it's going to bring it up, right? And so they're going to have to add more. But because their team got so good at the game, right? This time, that added percentage actually wasn't quite accurate. And as we saw with things like the Race to Worlds First, there were actually certain comps and teams that literally weren't able to clear, like they made one switch to a different job and they were able to hit some of the DPS checks that they needed, which I think
we did it. We had Todd learn a job overnight and play it for the first time at half proficiency and do better than a job he had been playing for years.
So when this first came out, people were like, what are they even talking about? And we also got some adjustments. So people were like, okay, well, here we go. They saw that. They fixed the 1%. That's fine. We don't even care about that. That's okay. Gear would get rid of that. Where are the buffs? And then we see Paladin and Warrior. And that's it. And Machinists everywhere were sad. But these were okay buffs, I do believe.
Just Machinists?
Well, yeah, there are quite a few sad people, yes.
Yeah, but at least with Machinists, you can count the mains on one hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Ouch.
It's so sad.
Cut to the quick. Oh, geez.
Tanks were just a lot more vocal because there were more of them in the community, right? You have Xeno alone, but how many content creators did you see that main tank and swapped off of Warrior that were very loud about it? A lot of DPS are used to flexing, right, between something like summoners and red mages, or you have melees that can change between their jobs. But when it comes to tanks, you find some players who play everything, but some who only want to play one thing.
Yeah, and I mean, they have less options, right, as well. I mean, it's a smaller category. And then when you're looking at things like DPS as well, I mean, Machinist, if we're thinking about this, with it being ranged to DPS, that category in and of itself is kind of a weird niche thing right now. So like versus having, is every group going to be trying to bring in a machinist? Is every group, if they're already running a dancer, if they're already running something else, are they really going to be trying to push for that? Versus the fact that every single party comp has to have tanks, and there's a smaller amount of them. And like you were saying, Ren, I think there are some very vocal players in the community because it is, again, like there's less options across the board. And you kind of want a sense of being able to bring in different tanks to address different issues, which is not quite the case. And I mean, a lot of people are struggling with that. My partner, it plays Paladin, loves Paladin. So all the comments at the start of the stream really personal hurts. But not
Bebop
inaccurate.
knows I love them.
But
I know.
A lot of the reasons you would bring a paladin is what they can heal the party if a healer goes down. They have an extra party mitigation. They have one less personal mit. Warriors have home gang up more often and can heal, but none of that matters when you're on the final floor of a fight because it's tuned for anybody to be able to tank it. So then you just bring whatever does the most damage. And unfortunately, the numbers. I mean, there's a number of factors, right? We had tomestones for the first time available. We don't know what tomestone pieces the devs took. We have 2-minute burst meta, and the dev team's going to be able to optimize quicker in a meta where you can't really change things out, as opposed to last expansion, you'd have things where it's like, well, I didn't expect these jobs to burst like this. They did something the dev team didn't consider because we can.
So often.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that some more. So we got, 6.21, some communication. There was a lot of people in the community who looked at the kind of job guide where they give the explanation of why, and there was some just confusion, just big confusion in the community, and a lot of people put out videos right after that, and we got the not unprecedented, because Yoshi P always talks to us, which is great. This is good stuff. Like, getting them to respond to us from these questions is great. So in that response, he goes into some details about the testing team and how they usually do this. And yes, as we kind of talked about before and we all thought, they play it, they do it, and I definitely want to talk about this. They do not do it in God mode anymore. They don't use debug commands anymore. There was a little bit of a misconception that they were still doing that. They stopped that after Gordius because they found out that that was a bad idea. And they learned, and they got better. Exactly, right? This is what we all do.
How could that be a bad idea? It's
well,
like it wouldn't give you a real perception of how the fight goes.
Coincidentally, Midas being the tier where they did nerf something's HP.
Yep.
But also to fix bugs that would just wipe you in a fight.
Oh, man. That tier was so much fun. But they kind of go into their methodology, and they say that they always do it this way, in that they beat it, they figure out how much damage they do, and then they go, well, people are better than us, so let's just adjust it a little bit to give them that, as they say, skin of the teeth victory in the initial week, that's important, right?
Oh,
you want to feel
screen fades to black and the boss dies.
Yes.
It goes from
Feeling
disappointment
so
to excitement, like
the nerd screams.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a precise thing, right? To have something that feels hard enough that you really feel that sense of accomplishment, that skin of the teeth, right? Like by the skin of our teeth, we're going to just do this. We're going to pull this off, especially for Race to World First or week 1 clears. I mean, it is such a difficult thing to fine tune. And yeah, this time it did not tune so good.
Yeah. And, this brought up a question. What comp do you think they were using? They said that they tested a lot of compositions, but there's a lot of reaction in the community saying they could not have possibly tested a warrior paladin, machinist reaper, what else? Red mage. I don't know, that sort of comp.
No, unless they're just better than us.
Yeah. There's almost no way.
Better.
So this gets into there's so many jobs, and it's so hard to get every comp. But from this response and kind of how the mechanics look, it really seems like they're in this, we are, double melee meta. And it's kind of implicit, right? It's just the way that it is. So there's some problems with that. There's a lot of videos out there talking about that. But we're going to get into it a little bit more after this. But we also heard from Yoshi P another confirmation that the way that they balance these jobs are by utility, right? Yes, how much utility do you have? Do you have a raise? Do you buff? But also the overall difficulty of the rotation and the job, which really does confirm things like people always say, well, summoner is easy, so it shouldn't do damage. Machinist is easy, ranged are easier. And they have this idea as well. So that kind of reverberated through the community. What do you guys think about that? The kind of we'll get a little bit more into it, but first glance, when you read that, how did you feel about that? Any immediate reaction?
Since Rin's taken a little bite, I think to maybe get up energy for this discussion, I'll jump in. This is really hard. I talk about this all the time, and I'm not even somebody who naturally, like when I approach endgame rating, I am not always the first pure numerical kind of rater, right? Like I like trying different things. I like trying different classes. I have ones that are tried and true that I enjoy. I'm not always the person that is in these discussions, the like absolute meta stickler, I like to kind of experiment with this, but I have to say that while there are so many ways you can play the classes in this game, and in most content, this doesn't really matter, right? Yeah. You can still clear most things. At the same time, I think we kind of all are at a point in the community where we're a little bit tired of being taxed for things that sometimes, in my opinion, don't even really play that big of a role in anything. Like the amount of our utility, the amount of range of buffs, when you compare to other games that have support as a category, or even like Final Fantasy XI, right? Really, over time in 14, utility has gone down and down and down to the point where we're basically just at things that are the equivalent of a straight up damage boost for your team, or things that sometimes have niche situational uses, but like not even as applicably as we used to have with things like the Astrologian cards, right? It's like utility could be, I guess, anything you consider from a feint skill to, those things that provide some kind of aid to your team. Dancer's Shield, I guess you could also consider a utility. But we're not looking at a game that has built its design around a series of buffs, right? It's not all these different buffs that play a role in certain bosses where you have to do this or do that or put this on or this helps or recoup mana or like. So it's something where, to me, these taxes, the mobility of ranged, for example, when, as many people have said specifically, this tier, we have some of the biggest hitboxes and almost full melee uptime.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that, don't you?
Yeah, but the idea for me about this tax almost feels so antiquated because unless you're going to be designing fights that make that tax a valuable cost to pay, then to me, these classes should not have to be paying for something. But then that leads us straight to, well, then are we going to homogenize them all to do the exact same thing? So I didn't feel great about this per se. I don't know about everybody else. What do you all think?
So just now, having been asked this question, I realized the way I feel being that range support. Defeated, honestly. I realized that I've just sort of accepted it. It's the way it is, and if I don't get mad at it, then I won't be sad about my job. Something that you said.
Where is everybody in this Savage tier?
Sure. We are all in the same static, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we beat P7S last week, and we're on the gate boss now.
Yeah. Okay, and you're the Fizz ranged, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
So, how much responsibility do you have? Like, do you feel like you have a lot more responsibility than everyone else in the group?
No, and I miss that.
Do you think you should?
Yes, I do. I honestly do. I super miss that about Coil. That freaking Avatar fight where you specifically had that tether you had to go in and get. You be there. You get that tether. You get the hell out of Dodge. I love that sort of stuff about Fizz range. I was also going to say, in response to something Rook said, we used to have more buffs. We had Minuet, because all that was there at the time was Bard. We had Minuet. We had it started as Mage's Ballad, turned into Refresh. We gave magic. They've actually changed whole systems in the game so that everybody has 10k MP, and you don't need Mage's Ballad anymore. But I miss that. I miss having that at the right time.
You gave mana. You gave a 10% physical reduction on a tank if you chose them with Palisade. There were a lot of things. You had Hypercharge was a buff for the party.
Good. Yes. All these things are gone or not useful. They've marginalized them entirely, and it's sad because I love to play physical range. I love being the person who's like, shit's hitting the fan. Here's something that might save us. And all I have right now is like Curing Waltz.
Shields on. Yeah, Curing Waltz.
Curing Waltz is like, oh, well, your HP's a little low. Here's did that help? No, okay, sorry.
And of course, Machinist has
nothing.
The one that does damage reduction.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, it's so fair.
They pigeonholed themselves, though, right? Yeah. Because for those of you who are newer players, you might not know this, but back in Stormblood, there was no 1% per roll that you brought. You could bring 4 melee if you wanted. You're not going to get an int buff, but you're not going to have a caster, so you don't need an int buff. And then they introduced requiring 1% of everything. So now they're in a situation where you can actually bring 1 less fizz ranged and still do more damage as a team than your 1% that was provided, right? And that sucks.
Yeah.
That sucks real bad because the 4th slot, like you were saying before, tanks, if you want to bring a warrior, that's fine. You don't hurt anybody. But if you want to bring a machinist, well, is the machinist competing with the bard and the dancer, or is the machinist competing for the 4th slot with a samurai?
It's so crazy.
There's no contest.
Because
No contest.
it used to be you could bring 2 fizz range, specifically if one was machinist, and it was better than other party comps. And now machinist is just fucked.
And I mean, all of this makes me think of, I used to main Astrologian, and I'm one of the people who, although I fully acknowledge why they made the shift that they did with Astrologian. And again, I think in many cases, in different iterations of it, it became more accessible for certain players. I think that the actual meta player base and or metagaming community as well will always gravitate towards things like just raw DPS uppage as far as buffs go. But one of the things that I loved about the initial design, and the reason that, especially in Stormblood, I had so much fun playing that class, was because to me, it was a situational buffer, right? Like, depending on how you distributed those cards, whether you made one really potent because you knew a burst window was coming up for somebody and you wanted them to just absolutely nail it, or you had everybody go down and we had casters or whoever that needed mana, so you'd put that mana out to the whole party, or you had one little squishy tank who was in like the absolute bare minimum gear on some dungeon and you're just funneling bowls on them as much as you can because they get hit with anything and it just destroys their health. In theory, I loved the concept of that kind of buffer class. Of course, did they find the tuning in it? Did they figure out how to make content to adjust around that and then continue to expand something like a support category or a flex healer support? Or no? And because of that, I understand why they went the way that they did. But we have seen this, I think narrow down so many facets. I was just talking recently about how I think Destiny 2 of all games has actually started to nail something like the feel of a ranged physical, taking advantage of mechanical abilities. And for example, in some of the Destiny 2 raids or dungeons, right? So when we're thinking about how do you really optimize the usage or create a niche role for something like having high mobility and give it value, I think immediately about these Destiny 2 challenges where you have these things where like some enemy you kill drops this exploding debuff. So you as a ranged have to like run into it, grab that, it goes on you and a timer starts. Another ranged then has to go with you who has taken a different buff from elsewhere in the arena that allows them to interact with these like air shoot doors essentially. So like they run over, they hit that air shoot door, you with the debuff go inside, you stand there, they hit you a second time with one of their like ranged abilities, and then because you're targetable at that point, and then that knocks the debuff off of you, you run out, they slam that air shoot and it vents out the debuff out of the arena.
Nice.
That's the kind of thing that to me is like a mobility based challenge, right? Because you're like juggling the timing, you're trying to keep uptime if that's a consideration, you're trying to go through all of this, but we just don't have that in 14, you know? I mean, we did at times, but not now.
I miss it.
The next bit
is
of
probably the closest we got to
yeah.
that. Or I guess Midas with A7S, where you can kind of manipulate the prisons.
Yeah.
But like the Gobwalker was probably the most innovative thing they had done in a raid.
Yeah.
But we all
People hated
it.
I was my static leader at the time. I chose to be the Gobwalker. I enjoyed it every week. It was different. It was a break.
Yeah. I was summoner, so I was blasting AoE. That was my job at that point.
I was a Dragoon.
We split
In fact, my static actually vetoed me to level Ninja just to get out of the Gobwalker halfway through, give them a goad, and get back in.
Oh, yep. Goad. Oh my goodness, I had forgotten about goad. Oh man. But this kind of segues into the community response from all of this. So we talked about kind of some of what we're feeling. We're going to get deeper into it. But after this, we talked a little bit about that first week job woes. People who were trying to clear right then had to switch around. And we talked about it a little bit, but have you seen, in your experience, any people dropping off because of it? Because I've seen a couple people say, this is it, I'm done. Like as soon as I
You mean like not play the game anymore?
Yeah, not raid anymore at the very least.
Yep.
Yeah,
I know people have entirely quit the game.
right. And
In fact, one of my static members, when we finished, said, "This killed any love I had for the game left. I'm done. Bye."
it's and you say that
no.
and people go, well, it's just a 1% nerf, and this is why we're going to this level, because yes, it was a 1% nerf, but we're going to get into the underlying issues. But I have heard that a lot too. I'm not hardcore anymore. I used to world first back in the day in other games. I don't do it anymore. But I try and stay in that community, and I've just heard so many people, from tanks who had to switch to ranged DPS who are like, this sucks, to casters who are like, well, what am I even doing? Wow, I don't do any damage comparatively, especially some black mages are very upset as well because they can't get to those levels that they used to be able to. So it's a little bit bigger than it seems. And
I mean, casters. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my
Sure.
perception is casters get a spot in parties now because there's not enough room around the
Because
boss
they
for
have
another
to.
melee. and of
Yeah.
course the buff.
yeah,
Or you bring a caster because there are mechanics like take the EX4 Barbaricia or Proto Carbuncle, for example. There are situations where strategies are made that put both healers together. You lose one, you lose both. You're going to want to have a caster that can res.
yeah,
Yeah, but you don't want an entire category of DPS class to just be, well, sometimes I guess we need a res.
right.
Or,
Especially not when their goal is to remove res from summoner.
Yes, exactly. Right.
At that
we'll
point,
just-
why are you going to have one?
Yeah, why? For what reason? At that point, if they
You can
don't
play
do the same
Pokemon,
damage,
right?
yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
can spin through my crayons very quickly.
I mean, I think there's something to be said about 14. I think oftentimes nails its class fantasy. I mean, the animations, the graphic, the feel. I mean, even with this PvP rework, I
yeah.
actually even loved how they pushed the unique concepts designs, even more so that I think
It's
I
amazing.
like some of the design and PvE content right now. But I mean, they nail it. But the problem is that you can't just have the flash of fantasy. You have to also then be actually able to live the fantasy of that class. So, like, if you're playing, I mean, Paladin comes to mind just because I've been watching every night that we go into raid, my poor partner, pull up on, various websites, the lists where it's like, Paladin is C tier. Paladin is like, why even bring
Mid.
Paladin? And it's like, what is the fantasy of that class? I mean, to be a caster, healer, holy defensive knight kind of thing, right? Where you would be providing that defensive quality to your team. You would be the savior in a sense, that kind of holy defender. Although knight is actually the translation, which has been a big confusion thing
Yeah.
with the paladin aspect in more Western MMOs
Knights
and things
protect,
like that.
right?
Right.
But
So,
for many years, it was the squishiest tank too,
Yep.
right?
mhm.
And then people would start the game and get confused, like, but I have a shield.
Yes. So
But
it's
that
like
only works sometimes.
the cohesion of that fantasy doesn't come to full fruition in content like this, let alone when you're actually looking at things like this numerically, and you're looking at these fights and you're looking at players who love a class. Poor Al, who's played Summoner since the very beginning.
fine.
Or, people saying in chat right now, like, I had a ninja
I think
and
Summoner was
Arsenic
great in
with.
Heaven's Word, though.
It was awesome in Heavensward. It was super fun. And even, Eden, it was kind of maybe a little overtuned, but it was fun, right? It was fun to optimize.
Absolutely agree. Like, we're not the most hardcore raid group, so when I hear Bebop should I switch off Paladin? It's like, you love Paladin. If you want to play Paladin, but not every group is like that. And in a group where you're trying to beat the tier in the first 2 days,
Yeah.
bye Paladin.
Or you have casual groups who are like, but Twitter said that we can't have these comps, so now you have to change.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that hatred, that vitriol, I mean, it takes something that you love, that you feel a strong connection to, that, might have a fantasy that you relate to. And then it does turn it into something where I think a lot of times people, I don't know, perceive this kind of reaction, like I'm quitting the game, as like grown-up adult temper tantrums about something in a game that you don't like. And sure, for some people, that's very true. I think some people are highly reactive and they really do have a level of vitriol that is like, you need to calm down and reconsider. But really, when it comes down to it, I mean, many people who are endgame players, this is a journey that they take over the course of all the years they play this game. The classes that they play may have great meaning to them. You might have a long history with them. Of course, you're probably going to flex at some point, play something, try something. But nobody wants to be in this position where you feel like you are constantly the one that is letting down the team just because of wanting to play a class
Yeah.
that you love and that means something to you. And, when we have these kind of numerical issues, I think it does lead to this real growing sense of dissatisfaction and unhappiness
Right.
that leads people to quit.
And it
It's
also really screws over players who are legitimately very good at those jobs. People in chat have been saying Party Finder has just locked out certain jobs. You
Yep.
might
Oh,
get the
absolutely.
very best red mage in the world. Like, no, really, I can do this. You will not be dissatisfied with what I
Yeah.
can do. And they're like, no, 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 no.
No.
And even
And
then,
these-
there is a skill ceiling. Well, not even a skill
Yeah.
ceiling. It's just like your damage ceiling. You
Yeah.
could be the best red mage and it might not matter.
And these perception issues trickle down through the entire community. Like one of the few things that ever actually trickled down. That's not a political take. But from the hardcore, right? So we were talking about people having to switch, but one of the ripple effects that has been talked about in the community a little bit is we hit that once. Now, world firsters want to win, right? That's why you're doing it. Now, are we going to see more split runs? Are people going to gather more gear than we normally used to need just to make sure that we feel safe? What do you think? As the resident, hardcore here, what do you think? Is that a fair assumption?
We had the precarious situation where we had an emergency and lost 2 days of prog.
Right.
And so we used those 2 days. We grabbed one of our crafters in the community and taught them the fights, and we did split runs to catch another DPS up to catch on that fourth fight check, because we got there and we were like, oh, we have summoned a red mage and we have a warrior, and this all sucks.
Yeah.
So we ran double caster. We did not run double melee. Normally that's a safe thing in prog because uptime's not easy.
Yeah.
But and keep in mind, when we're saying uptime is easy, we mean melee uptime, right?
Yes.
Melee
There's no such
uptime
thing
is
as caster
free this
uptime.
tier, but caster uptime sucks. We had when we had our summoner switch to black mage, he suddenly started complaining a lot, and they were like, "Well, this sucks," and I'm like, "Well, let's see what we can do to help you out, right?" But then it's like, "Oh, well, it's too much work. Let's just make them lose the casts, right?" But people don't think about that for melees. You get them what you can, so that becomes its own problem. Then we had our training arc for Todd, where he went from warrior to dark knight overnight, and literally all we did, he looked up an opener, we got a party together. We went into P1 from last year, and I was like, all right, do the opener. He's like, you don't want to hit a dummy? I'm like, no, well, you're going to be pulling a boss, and this is about the size of the hitbox anyways. Pull the boss. Did the opener, wiped it. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Did that for about an hour, had the opener down, then went in the next day, scuffed a couple of things, missed some TBNs, but instantly it was like 500 DPS higher than warrior.
Yeah.
And
So nuts.
and he was playing warrior correct.
Well. Yeah.
And there's another thing too. Dark Knight has 2 oblations and a TBN, so you're going to be able to keep more party members alive.
Mm-hmm.
Their invuln just heals himself back up to full if they need it. Their mitigation covers multiple hits instead of just shake it off's one. Like Dark Knight is just like the play right now. Dark Knight Gunbreaker. That's why I went Dark Knight for DSR as well. And that's another situation where like composition definitely mattered,
Right.
because if you didn't bring certain jobs for mitigation, you're going into the final phase. Then you suddenly need to be like, all right, well, white mage needs to use their 2 personals on these 2 DPS, and then I'm gonna mitigate this person. That tank's gonna mitigate that person, and then we live. And then you get through it, and you hit the AOE on Dragon King Thor, and everybody's got like 200 HP, and you're like, holy shit, we did it.
We made it.
But that kind of thing matters when you're like racing, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is then people watch these races and they're like, well, that's the comp we need.
Mhm.
And sometimes people just play a job because you want to play a job. Like I played Gunbreaker this year because I just wanted to play Gunbreaker. I should have played Dark Knight, but I just wanted to play Gunbreaker. And then we ended up with Gunbreaker Dark Knight anyway, so it worked out. We had a swap from Summoner to Black Mage, and then everything became a little bit easier. But the split clears, to go back on point, I definitely think is something to look towards in the future if they're going to keep this type of tuning, but I really don't think it's going to happen again. I think Square was probably like, holy hell, we're losing people. Let's not ever do this again.
Right.
Like, we're already going to get Criterion Savage. We're going to get another Ultimate. So, like, Raiders are going to want for nothing, right?
Mhm.
So make it more accessible. And if you were to ask me, I think this tier probably should have been the same difficulty or easier than the last tier if this one is tied to accessing Criterion's content faster, accessing the new ultimate. Like, this is going to be tied to so many facets that it really shouldn't have been as difficult as it was. So the HP nerf, we had the check without it. So our team was disappointed when they just like shadow nerfed it. And we're like, there was no heads up. We literally took the Monday night off beforehand because we're like, nothing's going to change. Let's just come in Tuesday. Somebody had COVID. Somebody else was sick. So like, whatever, take the night off. We all would have pushed if we knew it was coming.
Yeah.
But I think the nerf was good because I've been doing a lot of Party Finder and they need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's always going to be that second level that inherits all of these issues and then suffers the worst, right? Because they don't have the mechanical and rotational savvy to push that hard. So you are pushed towards the meta to cover up those, deficiencies. So
and it was so many, like, you're locked to this job, that job. It was so weird opening up a Party Finder. It's like 1 out of 8 players, right? But like 6 of the other jobs are already set to specific things, and you're like, wow. And item level, right?
Yeah.
So like Party Finder went both ways. You're like, okay, well, if you're like 614 or higher, you'll be fine, whatever you take. But then they're like, nah, 618 and Metacomp.
Yeah.
We're not taking chances.
Right.
I mean, this was so interesting. And Aldino, I actually thought it was funny that you brought up splits in conjunction with this, right? Because like we're all saying, like we're seeing, right? Gosh, I remember when they removed stuff like the synergy between classes because, as they said, we don't want anybody to be
Piercing
locked
buff.
out because of these, these combos.
Like Dragoon was a hard lock. You needed it, right?
Yes, right? And in many ways, like, I agree with that, but at the same time, have we lost out on some of that interesting comp or things that work well or how you have unique buffs or whatever? Yeah, for sure. But it was interesting to me that you brought up the concept of splits because I had actually never encountered splits until I was casting for World of Warcraft's Race to World First.
Yeah.
And I was watching the extreme evolution of splits in a game, which was beyond comprehension to me. I mean, many of these guilds. So, okay, let me just run this down in case anybody has no idea what we're talking about and like what this means. Because Rin was talking about the fact that in Party Finder, right, we're having these like eye level lockouts. We're having these other, modifiers, specific set classes, all this kind of stuff, right? With that, from my perception of how I was seeing splits, the idea is that if you have this headway for getting gear before the tier releases, right? In a game like WoW, for example, they run these split runs all the time where you go in and like people on your team try to fish the drops that they need from whatever it is to get this potency. Now, in World of Warcraft, it's even worse because you don't have like the equivalent of these totems and other things. So it is like a fully RNG drop as to whether or not somebody gets a piece. And because they are, again, kind of that like lockout, weekly lockout, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what they do is they either make 1 million alt accounts or they pay people money to come in and try to get the drop for a specific class. And what I was hearing behind the scenes, because WoW's Race to World First is a very different level production.
Yes.
There are, massive sponsors, all kinds of things that come in for this. It's like an esports thing in and of itself. Some of these groups were telling me like our funds, like half of our funds are just to pay people to try and get the gear that we need, just to have the highest, best gear for when we do Race to World First when this releases in a week, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about how these splits, like, are we going to see something like splits actually playing a role in Race to World First or early prog? We already are, in a way. Is it going to be the same as in WoW? No. But yes, as we're seeing here, although now we're several weeks out, people are literally saying, if you want to do this group with us, you have to have whatever drops. You have to have the highest level. You have to have this kind of stuff, right?
There were a few groups doing 4 alts.
That's gross. It
So you have to
sucks
run
so
every turn 4 times a week. There's going to be another level to it, of course, right? The ability to consistently re-clear the early floors. Some of them are a pain in the ass, and you'll get through the first 3 floors, and then Reddit and Party Finder will have found out things you didn't know to get through mechanics, so that you can make the re-clears easier. But what are you going to do? Struggle a second time for the chance that maybe you need it? Like that comes down to it too. And it's like, well, what? And then what happens if people are like, well, I can only get like 2 days off for PTO, and that's been the nice charm about Final Fantasy's Race to World First, right? Is it doesn't take a very long time. So now you're like, what are you going to do? Are we going to just do the 2 days and whatever we get? But and then it's going to, and I already know this causes arguments because I've already heard about it. People start fighting where it's like, well, you're wasting our time by not doing splits. Well, you're wasting our time by doing splits. And then you just don't know at the end of the day what it's going to come down to. And this is the first time it's happened. It's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
We were actually, I forget what we were talking about. I think it was when we were actually talking about Ultimate and how just like 2 months ago, splits were barely a thing in this game, and suddenly they are.
I mean, One thing sorry, really fast.
Oh,
One
no,
thing I
Tony,
think
it's
they
good.
did to try and counter that was to not balance it around the absolute full set possible best eye level you could have. Of course, that led to some discussions about then does that make certain parts of the raids too easy because you're not accounting for the other gear pieces. As was mentioned in chat, and as Joan I think had mentioned a few times, apparently they did say that they were running it only for their testing and crafted gear sets.
Yes.
So, I mean, on one hand, I think that helps ease some of the pressure of splits, but will the community automatically go there anyway? Absolutely.
You need that. You need that. That feeling that, okay, I have prepared myself. This is something that Zen and Rook, you know this. I am literally insane about preparation for raid because of WoW, because of WildStar. You have to prepare. You had to do splits. You had to have ults. You had to do all that sort of stuff. And it feels horribly when you're in that mindset to feel like, well, there's another step that I have to do now. Oh, shit. Okay, how am I gonna make that happen too? You know,
Well, how many
like,
people come back to the tier and they're like, yeah, I haven't played in like 3 months and let's go do this. And then you're going to show up into P5S and they're going to have I600 gear from last year. And you're like, you can't actually use that. You got to go get new stuff. Well, I don't have money.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
you're going to die.
that's
You're
it.
going to die a lot.
And you know, the last bit of the perception issues is kind of that final trickle down to people who don't interact with rating or don't really, don't have the understanding. And a lot of the response from them has been, well, it's a 1% nerf to HP. Who cares about that?
What's the big deal?
Right, exactly.
Other games are way more unbalanced.
Exactly. And, I'm going to go through all of that too. There's so many of these responses, right? But the issue here is that it's a big deal because it's the first time, and we're all hurt in the like in-game community from seeing WoW, there's only WoW right now, but other games before, seeing where it could go. And yes, the 1% nerf, nobody's actually talking about that. That doesn't matter at all. It sucked when you were working on it, but a 1% nerf is gone. Like, it's really the underlying issues that we need to talk about. But there was also some responses like, well, hardcore players, what do they even know? Right? They're not devs. They're not as good as the devs, especially with that misconception of what they said that 6.2.1 blur. But we've seen a lot of times where players actually do know more than the devs in this game. And I have a few examples, and we don't have to go through the first one. And I just remember the night that it happened. So Ninja was released back in 2.4 something before Heavensward. We got Ninja and they were like, yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be cool. You guys will love it. And immediately, as soon as people started using it, the devs went, wait, how much damage can you do? Holy crap.
It wasn't
why?
just that.
Yeah.
Warriors took off their jobstone and slotted in perfect dodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you could just take a buster and delete it.
Yeah. I had forgotten about that part. You're right. These little things that we could do. Ninja was pre-pull Huton. They didn't think that anyone would do pre-pull macros.
And then you
They
do the
are wrong.
flying Huton for people who didn't want to pull the boss, where you could actually launch the Huton to where the boss was going to be.
The commonality here is that we figure out things just in the community that they never thought of because they didn't have the time, right? They spent a lot more time on this tier, but they didn't spend the time that we're going to spend as a community crowdsourced, right? How many different versions of purgation and harvests are there? What's the best one? We will eventually get to it because Party Finder will have it, right? They didn't have that. There is some knowledge that players will have that devs will not think of. Caster Bard, Machinist. Machinist was hilarious in Heavensward. Oh my goodness. I remember people just pumping out damage, and they were like, wait.
There was also stance dancing. So you'd play Bard, and you'd be casting, and you'd come out of it because you'd be at a point where you don't have an OGCD, so you'd like come out, repelling shot, go back in. Like there was, and this is not tank stance dancing, which was a completely different thing. But you'd have range stance dancing for minute gains, and it was big. You'd also have the devs are also going to have a certain perception, right, where they're going to expect a fight to go a certain way. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to think outside the box because you're going to be limited by what you already know.
Right. And that goes directly into Ultimate Weapon Ultimate. Right. Now, I heard this, and I didn't do the fight, but they were talking about the wake order of the bosses in there. And I really wanted to talk to you about this, Ren, because I know that you have done it. There were some configurations of how you could do it that made it so much easier. And they couldn't have thought about it. There's no way.
I looked at the notes and I was wondering
Yeah.
if you would know something about my team doing that progression.
Oh,
Did you
no.
happen to catch? We figured out how to wake Titan for the world.
Yeah. Okay, so I knew that it was the thing, but I didn't know it was your group that figured it out.
So people got to La Habrea and hit a wall, and they were like, "What's happening? What is happening?" They tried every LB imaginable. Turns out you needed them all. Garuda, people started figuring it out. Like, there's this buff, we got to work on it, and there was some data mining that teams had out there. So that's common knowledge that people do that. You shouldn't do it, but it happened. It is what it is. And in retrospect, the devs had said that Wu was created as a streaming spectacle because after UCOB's popularity, they created something that would be a gotcha for people.
Yeah.
Well, while people were learning the proper way to wake Garuda, which had to deal with the friction cleanses, you would get these stacks of arrow debuffs, and you would have to put them in a bubble or get rid of them with a tethered AoE. And with a certain amount of stacks, Garuda would wake, and that phase would change, which means that the devs had to develop the fight twice, right? One where you would have an enjoyable experience without the wake, and then two where you would do it with the wake as intended. And when you didn't wake it up, you were like, wow, we were like, all right, well, this is an ultimate not based on the raid tier, it was based on the primals, so it's going to be easier. And we're like, this is really easy. This is this is pathetic. Like, this is really easy. Maybe UCOB was just too hard. And then we get to the end and we're like, wait a minute, everything's changing. This actually sucks. Basically, we did nothing for a whole day. So our team had a different theory, right? We were like, well, we were doing Titan, and it was like a wipe. We had people miss their jails, and I was just being me. For those of you who don't know, I like to screw around a lot in raids. Maybe my friends end up murdered from bosses' AoEs that I didn't PK them with. Maybe they do, but I was like, you know what, Titan, how do you like it? We kept getting this dot by standing in its puddle and dying, right? So I was like, how do you like it? And I pulled him into the puddles that were on the ground, and then it went boom, and he got a debuff, and I was like, we were all like, what the fuck is that? And instantly there was 1,000 Japanese clips with titles I couldn't read. Yeah. And I was like, what is this? And then people started learning that you could wake Garuda. So we're like, you know what? This is fine. They'll figure out Garuda. We're already cleanly getting to Titan every single pull. We'll figure out Titan, and then the world will meet in the middle on Aetheryte. And that was the coolest thing. It was so cool to see people working together across chats, on Reddit, on Twitter. It was really, really cool. But the way the fight changes was also very interesting, right? So Garuda in particular, Aetheryte's really only one way, Titan's really only one way, but Garuda, you change the way the buster works, where she'll do a buster when she's woken. It'll be a stack on the group, and there are also these little feather lances that go around the outside of the arena. And if you wake Garuda early enough, which I think was intended, then you have to have a very specific dodge outside of the arena. You have to wait and leave to avoid these feather lances that'll just destroy you. Right. But the world kind of woke it late, and it made it really, really easy because instead you just had these ads you DPS down. And I don't think anybody really knew the intended solution until way later because it worked. Yeah. And even knowing it, I still think the late wake is safe. But now with the stat squish and the way the job balances come and the new jobs and everything, you kind of do early wake because you push her too fast now. But it was super cool. It was super cool. I loved that whole experience. Waking the primals was super awesome. Getting to Ultima was super awesome. The way the enrage works, where as people died, it powered up Ultima, and then he the enrage sequence where he absorbs the weakest player first up to the strongest player, which is kind of like how it worked, where Gaius was building power on Ultima Weapon. I thought that was so conceptually, it was very thematic, right? And the music was very thematic, and it was just, the whole thing was a great experience.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, all I was gonna say, it was with some of that fight design, one of the biggest things is the mislead, right? So as people figure that out, of course, it gets easier and easier over time, in a sense, right? Although it's still an ultimate fight, but Ubu is now considered broadly by most people to be the easiest of the set to get into.
Easier than some savages.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about, like you were saying, dev versus player knowledge, Albino, it's amazing, this journey of discovery. I love Rin, that's so cool, and it was so cool to hear it from your perspective too, because in those moments, right, it's so phenomenal. But yeah, did they anticipate that down the road people would figure out how to do this and game it and gimmick it so much that now, like you're saying, that one is easier than some even savages, if you really just kind of learn what you need to do for it? Sure. Is that maybe part of the actual design? absolutely, but is
Yeah.
part of that perhaps as well? I mean, again, how
People
players.
found how to only have to wake one primal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You can clear with only killing one primal now because you could just DPS things down. I don't think they ever saw that coming.
Yeah, there's these things, right? Just to motor through the rest of these, because there's a lot of examples of this. Like, and I think that is one of the better ones. But there's brain dead strats. Like, there's no way that they wanted us to do purgation in that way. Like, there's
Considering
no
the
way.
markers cannot be placed
Yes,
by
exactly.
intent. No, I'm pretty sure they intended us to do it the way a lot of groups progged it with using the entire arena.
Yes. Right. So, we will find a way around it, and that will change the configuration of a fight to then make it easier than they expected. So we do have this sort of knowledge. And before we go into the underlying issues, I definitely wanted to talk about a couple of things. Because it comes up in the community so much, there's a lot of people who have a backlash to people talking about balance because we're not WoW and it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter somewhat because, yes, you could probably, right now, you could probably clear it with any comp. You have gear, you're going to get through it. Right? It past week 5, that was my expectation. Week 5, people have weapons, people are doing party finder. It's probably going to be just fine. If you start right now and you're playing a machinist, if you can get into party finder, if you can find people that'll let you can probably clear. Right?
Your party finder is probably more likely to clear than a casual group that has not been doing splits because your healers are going to actually have gear.
Yes, exactly. And they can contribute to cover up that. But here's where we start getting into the underlying issues. Why is it this way? We talked about like the effects and how we feel about it, but why? And to me, there was a lot of stuff that was pulled up in the community that I really wanted to go through. So the first one, and a topic near and dear to my heart, is 2-minute buff cycle. Because in the past, everyone had 2-minute buffs. They had 90 seconds. They had 60 seconds. You had 180 seconds. And you all kind of had your moments of burst, and they lined up. They always will, opener, whenever else. But with Endwalker, we saw them, and I hate to say the word homogenization, because that's another trigger word that a lot of people will hear and go, whatever, I don't want to talk about that. But with forcing everyone into the 2-minute meta, we're seeing some patterns emerge. Like, that 2-minute buff is the most important time in the entire fight, every time it comes up, for you to do your damage. For everyone.
You can no longer screw up.
You can't.
Which is easy to just say don't screw up, right? But what
Yeah.
if you die 10 seconds before the burst?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what if you're one of the jobs that doesn't fall into this? Or what
Yes.
if, when you hit that 2-minute window, it's like not actually that optimal of a spot for you, even though
Yeah.
technically you could do what you need there. I mean, I've
We've been
always
talking about in 7,
Mhm.
where the knockup comes like right in the middle of a burst window. It's like
Yeah.
you could
You get knocked
just
up at
do
6:17.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
do it, or
People
you could,
hold it.
Yeah, hold
Or
it.
you
don't.
But
But then what happens
if
when you
you're-
hold it and the enrage timer makes you lose a use?
Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. We had
That's
like
what
a
we've been
10-minute
hitting.
discussion, like deciding how we wanted to handle this,
Mm-hmm.
and one of our healers just goes, and I'm like, oh, you're bored. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
but
You
for
know,
example,
it
with
sure
Summoner,
would suck if Carbuncle started jumping around the arena untargetable at 4 minutes.
Yeah.
No, but
Yeah,
the one
I
thing I
mean-
did want to bring up is like Summoner,
Yeah.
you can't stop. You
Yeah,
can't
there's
stop.
no stopping.
You can't
Can't
stop.
delay.
Yeah.
So everybody else delayed, and you're just still sitting there going, I guess I won't get any buffs for the rest of the fight. Cool.
I love
And
the
the
call out.
same-
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're all so excited. I keep
This
going
is-
like immediately. We're
This
like,
is
It's true.
this is one of the biggest
ahead.
points, right? And I was just going to say, it's really fun and exciting when you get to Devour, like right before Devour, and you hear the call out in our group, okay, don't use your good stuff. And as Summoner, I'm like, and Bahamut go burr, because I cannot.
Goodbye.
Yeah, it's like,
Well, that's
goodbye.
a situation with P8S P2 right now. You get up to
Yeah.
high concept 2, and groups use your 60s because you'll lose a use if you don't. But so many party finders I joined, they want to do their potions as soon as you get your Everburn buff. And then you have
right.
people all desynced, and then you lose the check. I had a 0.3% wipe.
Ugh.
oh, yes. And like all of this happens. I mean, somebody mentioned in the chat earlier about White Mage. So I've been playing White Mage this tier, and it is, yes, one of the more straightforward healers. But one of the things I always liked about the idea of White Mage is the fact that we have so much raw healing, and there's so much stuff you can do on the fly, and there's so many, right? If you're gonna make a healer that theoretically is maybe not gonna have all the other stuff and the buffs, again, we're talking about these taxes, right? But that is a powerful caster, is the most potent healer lore-wise in the game, has abilities like Benediction, which are massively huge things that you can use, and theoretically could be the hardest hitter DPS-wise, right? We have this whole other thing where I'm looking at this, but because, again, White Mage isn't patterned with everybody else, I'm like, okay, so I have my Assize, and I have my Lily, and I have all my stuff ready to go. When we have the healer split knockback way before the toss-up in the air, so I guess I could sit on it, but then I'm losing my Lilies. And I'm
But
not
you'll
gonna
move it
get
out
as
of
many
burst. You don't want to move a
Assizes.
size out of burst.
I
Yeah, you
know.
can't do that.
So you're sitting there like, okay, cool. So do I just like miss out on using an Assize, or do I just sit on this, I guess? And it
And
just is not fun.
And some of it is okay. Some of it is all right. And without the 2-minute buff alignment being the strict meta, that was fine in the past because you're like, okay, I'll catch up, right? I'll catch up in the next one. It does suck. Like for pure optimization, it still sucked to miss out on burst. But you had some other cycles that you can hop onto. But for an outlier to the meta right now, let's start talking about Paladin. Poor Paladin. And the devs even
Great,
called
you guys
this
are
out.
bursting when? I'm
Yeah.
on a strict 63-second loop. Sorry.
Exactly. Right. And the devs called this out in the patch 2.1 notes where they said, Paladin is a high sustain job. They don't burst all the time. And we see that is a problem. We're going to give you some potency for now, but 6.3, we're really going to look at it. And you look at that and you go, but you did that yourself.
No, you look at that and you go, you lied. I'm going to correct that sentence for you.
Okay.
Paladin is a sustained damage job. It is
Yeah.
not a high damage sustained job. It is just
Sure.
sustained.
That's true.
And this is a big problem, right? Because I mean, we're getting to we're talking about this. We're getting to this, right?
Mhm.
Because there's a sense of the fact that I don't know. I feel so torn, and maybe you all can weigh in on this. Because on one hand, can we make everything uniform around this window? Sure. And as they have been talking about some of this Paladin stuff, as they have been talking, they're like, we realize that these are things, and I get this sense that they are contemplating, well, maybe we bring everything into line with the idea of everybody has a burst, everybody uses it, everybody does this, right? But in my mind, that's going to be the most boring thing of all time because I mean, I want classes where if I make a stumble, I can be innovative, I can be creative, I can, improvise throughout a fight. I want a class
You want to
where
play
if
monk.
I
Yeah.
know, it's like I want something where if I am able to
Built into the freaking
I
job.
know.
Yeah.
I know. It's like
I want to be
a
able
class-
to use a 4.5-minute potion and
Yes.
Bloodfest at 90 seconds because it's up there. I want to be able to
Yes.
Salted Earth and still have something instead of using. You have a 9-minute and 30-second fight, so you're going to use a 4.5-minute potion to do nothing.
To nothing.
Yes. I want a
Hurts so
class where
bad.
if I'm going to be the sustained damage dealer, then if I keep that up over the course of the fight, it has a payoff. Either a cumulative thing that stacks, that makes me more and more powerful, that brings me on par with everybody, or just something. Because I want variety in this game. I don't want to just be playing the exact same class, but pink color, or have swords, or, I want there to
They
be
said they wanted to avoid it, right? They wanted
Yeah.
to homogenize buffs for the skill ceiling to come down and the floor to go up. But they wanted jobs to still be unique, so they kept a couple of jobs at 90s. But what choices what was their criteria for choosing who gets to stay
Yeah.
unorthodox? And then by making everything synergized, I feel like they did exactly what they didn't want to do, right? Like if you take Stormblood, we had tank stances, we had bursts all over the place. You had what? Presence of Mind was like a 2.5-minute cooldown or something.
Yeah, I think so.
It was very, very wild, very wild.
Yeah.
In fact, at the beginning, you had tanks wearing slaying gear, and you had a supermax potion that was 15 seconds, but stronger than the grade 1 tinctures. So you actually used a grade 1 tincture in your opener, and then if your kill time would cut the potion short at the end of the fight, like Alt-Roit did in our speedruns, you would run a supermax potion from the previous expansion just to do more damage, and things like that was awesome. Then you
Yeah.
went to Shadowbringers, and they took so much away. And I'll use tanks because I'm a tank.
Yeah.
Tank balance was never closer than it had ever been. Last expansion, it was the best it had ever been, period.
Yeah.
Everything was really close to one another, and it really didn't matter. Like maybe you took double Gunbreaker, double Dark Knight, Gunbreaker, Dark Knight for speedruns, but Warriors could still compete. Now that's not a thing. You're
At
not
all.
bringing them in, and jobs are technically the closest to them to the way they should burst that they've ever been, right? Everybody's on 2 minutes. Everybody is on paper looking like it should be good, but it's not. It's the worst it's ever been because they put themselves in a situation where they're pigeonholed, right?
Yes.
You now
And-
have this tight thing. And then for healers, you have busters coming up, raid wides coming up during burst. How are you going to handle that? You're just going to, I guess you're not healing here. It's not that great.
Yeah.
And
And
the thing,
oh, you go.
oh, no, I just wanted to, as a healer, I just wanted to add into that. The thing is that, like, don't get me wrong, I actually feel like as a healer, I have genuinely enjoyed the more punishing heal variety this tier. I love the bleeds. I know so many people hate them, but the bleed, the poison, honestly, it's always felt to me that oftentimes my heal over time was just there as a, it's not a cheat, it's in the game, but a cheat to get more uptime, where I'm just like,
Oh,
put
like you
that on.
regen for movement, but
Yeah.
now you're
Yes,
using it like for
yes.
survivability.
Yes, and I actually like that there is a reason to use that, and that the extra damage for with these dots and things like that, it feels like it's not even just I slap the dot on and they're fine. It's like I slap the dot on and hold on to your butts, hold up, hold on a second, like, and another heal, you know, and I like that. But like you're saying, it does create some strange dissonances. I mean, I, as a healer myself personally, have always thought, like, yes, optimization is important, but like for me, if I'm playing a healer, I want there to be a reason that I'm there healing. And so, like, I don't mind that it's more punishing, but like you're saying, there are these parts where I find myself stumbling because of not only things like that pre-nerf 1% or stuff like that, but also, yes, like if I want to have any hope to not always every single week be the bottom of everything, I have to try and take advantage of some of this. But if I'm technically doing what my job is, then it does throw a big wrench in it, you know?
That's an interesting thing you just said, doing what your job is, right? Because how many DPS use their mitigation properly or don't because they think it's optional?
Right. Exactly.
How many people don't faint or they don't put this there? And then you go to heal and you just die because you don't have the throughput to survive everything if your party doesn't use what they're supposed to. Or the tanks go, I wasn't healed, I wasn't topped. Well, what did you use for that buster? Reprisal. You're like, well, you need a little bit more than that.
Yes, yeah. And honestly, maybe this is a hot take. I would be fine if they factored in things to make everybody have to use the things they use. If we gave more reason to utilities, if we gave a wider range, if Paladin as a defensive tank, you know, actually could make the difference of survivability of certain mechanics, I would not mind that. But it requires, like you're saying, a broader view of how certain roles are played when all we have been doing is like narrowing down to this one specific point. Utility doesn't matter, nothing matters, only thing that matters is damage. What ups your damage? Great. Like, and that's it.
Right now on P8, your mitigation absolutely matters because the more you mitigate, the more your healers don't have to GCD heal, the more damage they can do. But there's a lot of situations right now on the door boss and in phase 2 where you will just die if people are not using their mit. And then people are like, well, in other parties, I'm used to doing it this way. Or, oopsie, I forgot this. Right? And you're like, well, you can't. Because now we're like, why'd we die? Healers suck. And then you spend hours. I bet I'm going to open up Party Finder right now because I'm logged into Final Fantasy XIV online. And I'm going to take a look at Savage and let's see. Every single party I am staring at. Every single one. Oh, there's one that doesn't. Okay. 59 out of 60 parties need a healer or two.
Yeah.
Right now. Because nobody wants to do it because they're getting blamed for things that are not necessarily their fault. And in some cases, there are a lot of healers who are not pushing their buttons the way they should because they're like, well, I used a Medica too. And like, well, you could have used a Lily and a Size because you're overcapped on Lilies and saved that Medica 2 for later, and it would have been better.
Something I'm actually really enjoying for our raid group this year is how much the melee are talking to each other, and the tanks are actually talking to the melee. Like, you have reprisal, okay, I have feint, and we'll swap it next time. And it hasn't been that way for many, many, many tiers. I personally am always hitting those freaking buttons because it's all I have to support, and I miss supporting. But it's even
I press saddle.
It's even become a game. Like, one of our freaking samurai, every time he does faint, he goes, ah, just to let us know that he's fainted.
That's pretty funny. I like that.
It's very cute.
So, you know, and this is what we're talking about, those things that you have to line up now because you have to. And this, it increases the skill ceiling in a way that I don't think that they really super anticipated. Because if you cannot sync those things up, you're going to fail, like you're saying, right? You're going to hit P8S and you're going to have no healers because it doesn't feel good, because trying to sync up is just so new and different now. And then, of course, DPS, right? Like, you could be on a samurai and you could just not do enough damage, and you might not know why. If you are new to Savage, you won't even know why. I'm not going to get into the fact that we don't have tools to look at it, because as we know, everybody has their abacus next to them. And that's
We don't have tools to look at it. We also don't have a structure in game. Like, there's a reason the balance exists as a resource, right?
Exactly. And that just compounds it on top of it. And we get into crit and direct hit, especially in 2-minute buff. Oh, not critting sucks.
We had a 1% wipe on P8S, P2, and I crit literally 0 of my big hitting abilities in our burst for Everburn. And if I had crit anything, we would have cleared.
Man, wouldn't it be nice? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that's an opportunity for a buff that we can have in this game.
Right. Wouldn't it be nice?
Could offer.
Yeah, it would be great if, I don't know, if some of these big attacks would automatically crit, right? It would be great if they would automatically crit. But
Is
they
this
did
a segue?
that for some of them, but not all of them. I'm just going to say here as a summoner, Akmorn is 1,300 potency. Oh, when it doesn't crit. It goes from, like, in my gear, it goes from nothing. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm watching it in opener, like, is it going to crit? Where's that big number? 40k. Gross. Okay. Next time I'm like, 80. It hit 80. And we die. And I'm like, why? But the double RNG here is just astounding. Honestly. Like, this, WoW has done this, and WoW players right now are probably like, they're still doing this. Yes, I know. There's still way too much RNG. But addressing this for some jobs and not others makes them the winner. Like, if you look at numbers, you can see that Samurai in general, not do the skill, just do to result, have the lowest range because they don't have to worry about that. Like, they don't have to worry about not critting. They do for some, don't get me wrong. But for the biggest, when you need it, you auto crit. And that flattens your range and makes it so you don't have those 0.3 wipes, right? You can rely on your samurai to do that damage every time. And it's so important, and it just feels so horrible when you don't crit. Like you were saying, Ren, like we had a, 0.8 on P7S a week ago, and I'm like, if I was on Black Mage, no, doesn't happen, because nobody died. I didn't need to raise. What am I doing?
For all its shortcomings on Warrior 2, it's going to do its damage.
Yeah.
Where it's going to do its damage, right? But you take Paladin and you miss your Confetti or crit. Sorry.
That's it.
Sorry. Like, Gunbreaker's Double Down under No Mercy, 1,440 potency.
Yeah. And you don't crit, and you go,
It's a good thing tanks get direct hit on their gear already, though.
Yes, it's true.
And that they don't have to meld it, because tanks and healers get direct hit, right?
It'd be great. It's so great. I'm so glad that they thought of that. I hope everybody knows
it's not the best.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, they either spread the potencies out,
Yes,
or they have it in a way where you're not going to really lose uses of it, and they hit hard too, right? Because then you end up in a situation where people are like, oh, well, we should burst after this, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to lose a use of this button, so I can't give it up.
Yeah.
Because it literally means more than having this in your buffs at all.
Yes.
Yeah, and it is one of the weird few things. I mean, they have removed so many other finicky, situational, when we still remember the old days when we had to put points into our stats.
Oh boy.
Remember the old days when you had all these different things,
I still have Super Sims on me.
all that
You remember
stuff.
the old days when you'd be locked into a DPS stance and you wouldn't be able to heal for like 5 seconds?
Because you hit it 3 times, but it just didn't register, but you didn't realize that you were missing all your potency because it was still somehow on even after hitting it 3 times. Yeah. I do remember, and although I actually enjoyed stance dancing, those were some of the drawbacks that led to Fury. So
For those of you who didn't know, you had Cleric Stance for healers, which would reverse your int stat with your mind stat. You'd basically heal for nothing, but
Yep.
you do a lot of damage.
yes, you would.
You'd be doing those summoner physics, yeah.
Yeah. You know, that useless
You
thing
would.
that Summoner has that causes
would.
utility tax. Yes, it's very weird, and that is something that still remains.
Mhm.
And yet again, I can't find myself totally saying we should just be done with all of these. It feels like something where, again, if you're going to make this a thing, then it needs to be a concern for everybody. You need to have a reason to make people meld for this. You need to have, or you need to bring everybody up to some point where their damage is equivalent. But it does feel as though right now it is one of the few things that leads to some kind of unusual still variance that they have just not taken out of the game. But they need to decide if they're going to lean into something like that as a factor you take into the equation, or if they are just going to not penalize those classes that, again, don't have those issues in quite the same way, or that have those issues, whereas others don't.
Effectively, don't pull your punch on the development. If you only go halfway in on something, it's going to fail on both fronts.
Exactly. It's going to be nothing to no one at that point. And yeah, something to everyone, especially me, is DPS taxes. So this is an age-old discussion. I mean, WoW back in the day. What do you mean I'm a druid and just because I could tank, my damage is lower when I'm feral? You know what I mean? These sorts of things are age-old in MMO, and specifically here as well. So there's a few different types of taxes that I wanted to get into that at least I identified, and I can't wait to talk more about this so that we can see if there are more. But because Yoshi P said that they take utility, they take how easy it is, and your job is, and kind of how easy it is for you to move, that's confirmation that there are these three categories, at least, of taxes. So let's start with utility tax, right? The kind of selfish versus support axis, right? And the first thing I wanted to talk about is, what is utility? In your opinion, what is utility? Is that... Yeah, go ahead.
I'll label utility. Like if we're strictly speaking in terms of how you impact the other players in a raid, right? Because every raid is going to be designed differently. I wouldn't include movement.
Sure.
Because you can't in every fight. But I would include it as something like maybe a monk's mantra.
Right.
Or feint, any mitigative or effective HP reducing abilities. I would also consider expedient to be twofold, because you do provide speed so that you can change the way you do mechanics. While they have said that they don't actually design mechanics for certain things like your anti-knockback or your sprint, I think that opinion has absolutely changed than they do nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can.
Yeah.
So for those of you who also don't know, back when they said that they didn't, you had a resource for your regular GCDs, and if you used sprint, you lost that resource. It went to 0.
Yep.
So that's been a change that they've had. But I would definitely consider utility anything that changes the ability to survive an encounter better. I wouldn't consider that to be damage enhancing abilities.
Right.
So I guess damage dampening.
Yeah, damage dampening.
I mean, I feel like they do lump a lot of the even, support utility, right? Support utility. I feel like they kind of smush it together, where like damage up, they oftentimes count into that equation. Buffs being something like that. But Rin, I do agree in the sense that I actually think that in my own perception of how this kind of goes, I would delineate utility versus something like true support, because to me support would be buffing. I guess you can also have an anti-support category, debuffing,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
And I know, right? So it's interesting because it does seem like in 14 they've kind of smushed all of that into one category, and then constantly narrowed down what that is, what that means, and tried to make it oftentimes irrelevant whether or not you even have it, versus other games. I mean, I play a lot of Guild Wars 2 where their boon system, and then they have dodge roll, and they have other things that make use of something equivalent to like our old TP usage, our old TP meter, right?
Do you want to know what I think might have been the perfect example of utility in Final Fantasy?
Sure, yeah.
Was Old Ninja. You had Smokescreen, you had Shadewalker, you had Trick Attack that debuffed. You had a lot of things that you could do. Yeah. So back in the day, aggro was a lot more difficult to manage. And ninjas had a way of manipulating that aggro for people, and that was fantastic. I think that was a really good example.
Yeah.
I would also, I mean, I would say that damage up abilities would count as utility now if Monk wasn't at the top of the charts while also featuring
Exactly.
Brotherhood.
I mean,
Right.
yeah. I mean, what I was saying with Guild Wars 2 is that their range of like support and boons, right? Much more like you were just saying, Ren, with Ninja, where you have a wide array and fights are literally designed around the kinds of things that are in the game. You know, you have many phases and many of the bosses that cause knockdowns, which disrupt all of your DPS, all of your rotations, various paralysis effects, you know, crippling effects, slow effects that can hit you, which we also have a variety of in the game. But to the point where people have stability as a type of boon that you can apply, stack, maintain, use in certain phases of fight.
Ignorant of Malice.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
sorts of things, like
It's a thief thing in Guild Wars 2.
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like in other games, I think even where they're still maybe exploring some of this. Although I think we have seen MMOs in general kind of struggle with support categories.
Yes.
But I would love to see more of that actually in 14. And I think if you're trying to make it so that you don't ever have to use them, it's your own self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, we don't want to make it mandatory so that people don't have, like, you don't have to choose to bring in a support if you don't want to. But also, we want there to be a tax for support or utilities if you have them on a class. But also, we don't want to design fights to do this because then you'll have to bring, it's like, it's such a bizarre circle.
Yeah.
And I'm just over here going, design the fights so that you have to have a debuffer, a support, a ranged, a mobility, a whatever, because as we get more and more jobs in this game, they are adding them to these categories and subcategories. So if you're just lumping all DPS in and all DPS are only relevant because of the damage they provide, then why have all the categories and why keep adding equally to them? You know?
You have a choice of what, like 11 different jobs right now that all do the same thing at that point.
Yeah, I feel like-
I would have been happy if we got no jobs with Endwalker's release
Yeah.
because it becomes
Yeah.
more difficult every time.
Yeah.
That's true.
I would.
That's true. I feel like something that maybe they don't take into account is even if I'm playing DPS and you're playing DPS and John down the street is playing DPS, we like different things about the DPS. John down the street loves numbers, so give him the one that does numbers. I like to go in and hit shit. Like do the little minute stuff nobody else wants to do. I love to pick up that tether and move it out of the party. I love to make sure so and so has enough buff so that they can do super great on their burst. That's something I like to do. So having those different kinds of jobs I think really is good for the community because different people like to do different things even amongst the same category of jobs. And not having those things in a fight honestly to me really sucks. It makes it boring. It makes it a boring fight. Not having that little extra bit to do is not fun, at least for me.
Yeah. And, you know, it's utility tax has a couple of categories we talked about, you know, damage buffs shouldn't be in there. I don't believe, but they can, and they don't, and they seem to be taking it into account. But one thing that definitely is taxed in this way is resurrections. Now, we see this differently in other MMOs, like, you know, WoW has a couple of set battle raises, you know, this sort of thing. But a resurrection tax in Final Fantasy XIV, since its inception, is one of the taxes that you get taxed even when you don't use it, which to me has been the biggest issue.
Before we talk about resurrecting, Aldi, can you tell everybody what weakness buff used to do to you if you died? Because it's not as good as it is now. Do you remember what it used to do back in Heaven's
I'm
Ward?
trying to remember. No, I don't remember.
Rook, do you remember?
Trying to think about it. Wasn't it like
All of your
massive
stats were
long
reduced.
term? Yeah, it
All
was
of them.
really
That means your
massive
vitality was
weakness.
reduced.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you would get up and die. You would basically be rezzed to be a mechanic slave at that point, right? Because you would die to the next AOE, and then you'd get another weakness, and then you get brinking. It used to be really, really bad. You'd reduce your damage and your health, and it was horrible. So it's better now than it is.
Yeah.
They also removed an FC buff that we used to have that gave you reduced time on your weakness when you died, which was back on your feet.
Yeah. Back on your feet used to be required. But it's one of these things where resurrections in battle, combat reses are super important to prog. Right? You have to see that next mechanic, especially if you're blind. I mean, it's the only way sometimes that you get through these things. It will get you the clear when you shouldn't have. You know what I mean? Like, it can save these
Like
things.
it'll
So it's-
get you a healer LB3 after
Yes.
a raid Y that was supposed to be failed and wipe you no matter what.
Exactly. These are the things that it's here for, and those moments of glory are great for that class, right? As a red mage or a summoner, and I know there's a bunch of them in chat, myself as summoner, yes, I hate raising people because I want to do damage. That's my job. But if I raise someone and see a benefit, then I have been taxed for a good reason. If I'm going through fights and no one's dying and I don't have damage and I haven't raised anyone, but I'm still holding my swift cast because
Well, what if
Yoshi
you
P
just
said.
used your Swift on a Garuda dot? You're in a potion.
Oh yeah.
Phoenix just came out, and your ninja dies.
And
And
then
your
you're
healers
sad.
say, I don't have Swift.
Why are you just telling me what has happened like almost every week in Prague? Like why do you know this?
We don't have a ninja.
Well, yes, not a ninja. I mean, I'm not going to
teasing,
call anyone out.
But it
Everybody
happens.
does. Yeah, it happens.
It is not a
It
zero
does.
number.
Yeah,
and
it
it
is
doesn't
not.
feel great.
No, it's horrible. And then you get into the position like what you said, like having a red mage does not mean that they should raise everyone. Like, this is a bullet point that you added, Renan, and when you did this, I was like, yes, finally someone's going to talk about this. Sometimes it's better just to raise a healer and have them limit break. Sometimes
Yeah.
spamming Verrays is the worst. Like, don't do it. Do not
Like
do
if
that.
you lose 5 people, let's say you lose 5 people right now and you're like, all right, red mage, res everybody, and a mechanic is coming up in 12 seconds, you cannot get them all up
It's
in
not
time for the
possible.
mechanic.
Mm-mm.
Or let's say your melee LB is going to deal like 300k, for example.
Mhm.
I don't actually know what it hits for right now because I haven't checked
Sure.
lately, but let's say it hits for 300k. And your raid's doing like 60k a second, right? How many seconds does everybody stay dead before you've lost damage by holding on for the melee LB when you could have just healer LB'd, which gets rid of a state of weakness,
Yep.
so people don't have a weakness,
Mhm.
and they can just get back into the game and they'll have done more damage that way. A lot of people don't think that way.
Yeah. Oh, red mage in PvP just makes me like, please, why can't you just bring this to red mage? Because the idea that, again, red mage gets the support category because it
Mhm.
technically has a heal, which I think is better at least than yours.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah, way
Aldia.
better. Way.
And then it
In
has
PvP, it's great.
well, yeah, and
In
in
PvE, it's also great.
in PvE, yeah. So you have that heal, which is strong, but then, their other utility being this consideration for resurrections, which they have reduced over time. I mean, probably rightfully
Mhm.
so. But we get into this weird situation where, again, like you're saying, is that the best thing to do as a DPS? Does that feel satisfying as a utility or support function? And then we get Red Mage PvP, where, if you are in these different almost mini ley lines, you have this
Mhm.
buff, this debuff, this different thing. And we've been saying on this podcast for so long, how much more fun would Red Mage be if there were reasons where at certain times you would purposefully imbalance your black or white magic. If you, got when you were at a higher level of this or that, you got this buff, this debuff, this thing. How much more fun would that be as opposed to just like someone died?
Mhm.
There's effectively no
hit it.
theme to it in PvE right now, right?
Yeah.
It's just to balance it. But thematically,
Yeah.
you have access to a res, but all of your attack spells might as well be the same thing.
Yeah. It's one of these things. Combat reses, especially in the way that 14 has done them, limit the design space of a job just completely. It makes it so that, okay, you have to take that into account no matter what, especially when some jobs in the same role have them and some don't. And then it just complicates. It makes the calculus of balancing insane because you have this tax. Because you should. I mean, it's a very powerful ability. I'm not saying it shouldn't be taxed. It's super powerful. It like, people like to de-incentivize it. Like, well, outside of Prague, you don't need it. Yes, you do. Someone's gonna mess up in reclears. You know that. It's gonna happen.
Red Mage can chain res, and they gave them an AoE magic mitt that the other
Yep.
casters don't have, and then reduced the damage proportionately, which made you just not bring Red Mage.
Exactly. And it's funny. I was doing some research because the only real way, and it's not a great way, so don't, it's not the best way, but you can figure out how much damage you need for Stone Sky Sea, the thing that nobody remembered. And that kind of gives you this idea of how they think the job should be doing. And right now, Red Mage is slightly, like ever so slightly, like 2% higher requirement the summoner is to kill their dummies. And it's like, is it?
I'm gonna tell you right now, Stone Sky Sea sucks for metrics.
Yeah.
If you're out there using it, don't, because it's catered around a 3-minute kill time where your
Yep.
damage is at its lowest.
Exactly. The only thing that I think you can glean is their ideas of the relative positions, because Black Mage is so much higher than everyone else, right? They are the highest requirement, period, of every job. So you can kind of see, okay, this is what they're thinking of, but it's not coming out. It's not actually coming to fruition in the damage that we're doing. But to move on from utility, if we're ready to move on from utility.
Before that,
Yeah, go
since we did talk
Yeah,
about rezzing and we did talk
Yeah.
about limit breaks,
Yeah.
it reminded me of how support, quote unquote, used to have the healer limit break.
Oh, yes. That's a good point.
I honestly miss that. Like at the time, I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna have a real limit break.
Your
No.
bard stays alive for like another 30 seconds and everybody
Yeah.
gets up.
Yeah.
It was cool.
I don't know how many times I have been the last person alive. It's not, like a majority. It might be a majority. I'm alive a lot at the end just because I can get out of shit quickly as a dancer. But I'm sitting there going, guess I'll die now. Boy, I sure wish I still had that old limit
Just go
break.
wallet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it throws back to what we were talking about actual real support. Like I was appreciative at the time that they gave me a DPS limit break, but we don't use it. I haven't used it since like Halicarnassus.
Well, the way that aggro is also limits DPS's ability to help out, right? Because back when aggro was a lot, like you would cut your aggro in half with various abilities, but you could also stay close to taking aggro in case you needed to be shirked because of a forced tank swap, which this tier has an abundance of. If one tank dies before a buster, the other tank is going to die.
Yeah. I don't know, it's
but there were a
something
lot of options.
Yeah, it's something I
Yeah.
wish that they would just switch back. It would be a great sort of utility that you could just give back. Why not? We don't use our limit break anyway.
I've had a really stupid idea for a long time. I've
Yeah.
always wanted us to have the ability to have a one-use reusable, like it doesn't get consumed and use it, but like a one-use Phoenix down per
Yeah.
fight. It's like everybody could do one res on
Or-
somebody else. Like it's a 5-second channel still, but everybody gets one. Because in Final Fantasies, you can use Phoenix downs as any character.
Mhm.
Yeah, or even like something like the whole party has one healer limit break that you can use like as the what is it? You hit G for it. What is it called?
Duty action?
Duty action.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's like a duty action in every fight. And whoever happens to be up, if it's like the ninja, if it's whoever, you can just use it.
Yeah.
I mean, that would
It's-
take some of the pressure off of classes that are, like you were saying, being shoehorned because of something like a resurrection.
Mhm.
It's
I again don't think resurrections are, like we should have them in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
As it is, for the most part, they design these fights where healer resurrections in and of themselves should theoretically be enough. I mean, of course, there are situations where, these other ones can be
Yeah.
helpful, as many people have said, oftentimes in Prague. But it's one of those things where, like, if you already have 2 healers, you're guaranteed all the resurrections that they have. So is it fair, yes, to like tax other DPS roles that have this without really giving them anything else robustly within that? I don't really feel like it personally.
There's
I
kind
feel
of a
like
separate tax that isn't being discussed, though,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's the
really quick,
enjoyability tax. Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
just gonna say, I feel like I lost what I was gonna say. So go ahead.
I was just going to say that as a community at large, we're seeing an enjoyability tax, right? There's
Sure.
a reason there's a drought in healers or a drought in X job, and it's because people don't want to be responsible for the mistakes of others, right? You're like, come on, why are you getting eaten by Devour for the 9th hour in a row?
Yeah.
And then you go into the next power, and you go into your next party, and you're like, well, it's a Devour prog party. I'm going to be rezzing again. You know what? I'm just going to play Ninja.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It has had a chilling effect on. I mean, it doesn't really show up all that much because you need a summoner or you need a red mage. So their numbers are always going to be high in parses, right? And in number of people clearing it on this. But it's that chilling effect of, okay, we got through, switch to black mage because we need it. Now get off of that job that was here to help us see it. Now switch, right? And that's a completely different set of gear, right? Usually, like, especially if
So
you're
We,
red
we
mage.
actually had somebody the other way around. They
Yeah.
wanted to play Black Mage, but we needed them on Red Mage progging and then swapped them out after.
Ugh.
But then
just
you
sucks.
run into a situation where the jobs just don't play anything like each other, right? So
Yeah.
You're either going to find somebody who likes the fresh, like it's a breath of fresh air versus people who are like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I do not want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally, honestly, I love healing. And I don't love it I don't love it because I'm optimizing my DPS.
Right.
Really, truly, I've always said what I love about healing is the fact that I always know what's going to happen in a fight. There's going to come a certain time where I know what the boss does. They've got scripted mechanics, even if they have RNG elements. I'm going to learn everything there is to learn. I'm going to do that. I'm going to figure it out. For me, what is fun is the unpredictable element. I
Recovering,
love
right?
having to, like, I love recovering. I love somebody makes a mistake. I love going into random parties, having no idea what the skill levels are going to be. Some people find that to be a huge turnoff because it removes, they want that kind of, even footing, always knowing what I do, always doing it. And the pressure of healing can be kind of intense in those regards. But I find it constantly frustrating, honestly, that there is so much emphasis just put on your worth. Because if you get if you get big mystery numbers from the atmosphere that appear in your brain and tell you how good you are at the game with doing just damage. Because to me, again, that's not why I play the class, for the fantasy. So I want to multitask, I want to optimize, but for me, I actually love things that allow me to responsively interact and watch and maintain and buff and heal my party, because to me, the people are always going to be far more interesting than the fight ultimately will be,
Sure. Yeah, someone's gonna mess up.
I was gonna say
Someone's gonna get hit.
we're talking about how this sucks to have to res. We are actually pretty lucky to be able to res in this game, I feel. But
That's true.
maybe handle it a little bit differently.
Given our circumstances, it sucks to res.
Yes.
Seeing as how we've had it the whole time.
Yeah.
14 kind of suffers from doing it all, doesn't it? They want the game to be a single player experience. They want the game to be a multiplayer experience. So that means that every single job needs to be able to do damage so that you can do your solo encounters, so that you could do all of these other things. So now because they can all do damage, now they all have to do damage. So now it's how much damage do you have to do? A long time ago, they also said fights were tuned for 0 DPS from the healers. I don't think that's a thing anymore either.
Absolutely not.
Like if you were to go into maybe P5 with best in slot, but if you were to go into P8 right now and your healers did nothing, you're not clearing that fight.
It's just
so you have a
impossible.
situation of like, and then you come into Rook's situation where people are like, well, Rook, you're worthless to me because you're not doing as much as my 5-year-old nephew who just started playing the job, so quit and uninstall, right? And then you're like, well, how much damage is enough?
Yeah.
Somebody is always going to be the best and somebody is always going to be the worst. That's just how it falls. And if you were to look at like your imaginary abacus healing numbers and you're like, well, wow, this person's a really good healer. That's also going to be skewed because how much damage did you take? How much did your co-healer contribute? How much mitigation did you use? It could be a very volatile metric for healers to feel their own worth and say, well, what should I be focusing on? What makes me good? What makes me bad? Like all these things that I can do to recover in situations. You're like, well, your parse was really bad. And you're like, well, I also got all these people alive in time for the mechanics. Like, yeah, but you didn't do enough. Like,
yeah. And I think a lot of that is because, I think it's amplified by a lot of these questions, right? What do we see being a priority focus? What kind of challenges do we see on display in fights? What sort of mechanics where if somebody executes something that is not just an enraged check, but is something else, that in and of itself is an impressive feat. Right. And so for me, it's one of those things where, every game deals with this. How do we create variance? How do we then also, within having a wide variety of things, maintain some kind of baseline of performance? No game has answered this perfectly. No game probably ever will, because it is just a part of the conundrum here. But I think we have seen a very interesting turn, because just like you were saying earlier, Rin, we were in, actually, minus like a few things here or there, a pretty good balanced state. Leading up, you know what I mean? Like the tanks were pretty well done.
Was fine.
Yeah, like there were.
You would pick your jobs based on your kill time, right? So if you're like, wow, this fight ends at this time, this tank is going to be perfect for this. Or wow, this fight ends at this time, I'm going to bring this healer. Or you're like, we don't need shields, we can go double regen. That's fine, that's great. And you were able to just do that, and it was fine.
Yeah. And
almost the entire expansion of Shadowbringers, I think.
Yeah, it's like we were at that point, and it felt oh, okay, like this is all going to be great. But now we've started to see how with various other tweaks, changes, I think an additional pushing of certain, like that kind of mentality in certain things, as well as like a non-responsiveness in certain design that has actually led us into this place where it's like, oh no, I'm very concerned.
Yes.
I'm a little worried. Wait, hold on.
Yeah. So
Actually,
go ahead.
I remember going to the media tour for
Mm-hmm.
Endwalker, and I wasn't happy with everything I tried. Some stuff was really cool, but I remember giving some feedback, and they were like, "Oh, we never noticed this. You know, this wasn't a problem to us. I'll bring it up and see if anything happens." And it doesn't. Like Dark Knight, their
Yes.
blood weapon, for example, right? It was really bad.
Absolutely.
It was really bad. And there's a lot of things that are on stack systems like atonement, breaking combo, things like that. And it's like, well, these things are things that actually affect like the player base in the fights that are encountered. And like, sure, you could not do that and you could play suboptimally, but people want a goal. When you're doing a tier for like the 30th week, you don't just want to go in and kill the boss. You want to do something about it, right? So like, all right, well, this is going to cause a problem if you do this. And like this burst feels really good at this particular moment, but then for the rest of the fight, if it's a 10-minute fight, it sucks because it misaligns. And they're like, well, we didn't really consider that, but we'll bring it up and we'll take your feedback into consideration. Then nothing happens. Then you're like, well,
yeah, where did it go?
I see why you could be like, just deal with it because we know better or not. Most of the time, they're pretty good about being like, okay, we'll take your feedback, right? If people are loud enough about it, but you also don't want to insult them and be like, well, you know, but it's a hard balance. But we did give a lot of good feedback, but a lot of it didn't make it through. Which is unfortunate because I feel like you're saying, Rook, now we're in a situation where balance is just in shambles. But on paper, it looks great.
Yeah, on paper, it looks awesome.
Like everybody's doing 2-minute bursts.
Yeah.
Everybody's viable. Look at all these jobs we have. There's always a melee arranged in a caster. We hit the sweet spot. There's always a shield healer and there's always a regen healer. Things are perfect, man.
Yeah. So good. And then we talk about taxes. Yeah, air quote. And we go into movement. So this one is very interesting in that I don't think it was specifically called out in the response, but it's something that we definitely know is a thing just due to, like, okay, let's look at Black Mage, right? Let's look at Black Mage versus everyone else. Why do they do the most damage? Is it complexity, which is another tax we'll talk about, which they say definitely is, but the complexity of Black Mage isn't the rotation, I don't believe. Well, there are some cursed transpose lines that I won't get into. Like, there's some real optimization craziness.
True.
But it's that movement.
Black Mage relative, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Black
exactly.
Mage relative have been real strats for many years.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
But now, not so much.
Yeah.
But I think Black Mage is more mobile than people think it is.
Absolutely. It really is. Like,
and now with all the
cast.
stuff they've added in, right? I mean, being able to move around is much easier as a Black Mage than it used to be. But yes, I mean, that damage, the trade-off, right? Mobility versus damage potency. So if you can really figure out when you're gonna plant and where you're gonna move and exactly where you need to stand, and I like that design. I like the idea of a strategic thinker, you know, turret style DPS, which is great. But yeah, it does lead us into many problems where when we see this being as the main determining factor, especially in many fights where I mean, you know what? It's like a good Black Mage is going to figure it out, and they kind of design around that because they don't want Black Mages to not do the fight.
Right.
So,
And
well, you also have Black Mages that figure it out versus a Samurai and a Reaper who can't choose to figure out a Swift cast for their Midari and their Communio, right?
It's true. Yes, and that's the thing. So we start getting into, okay, so there's people who can move Fizz range. Just gonna say they can move at all times.
Bard, Machinist, Dancer, and Summoner.
Yeah, exactly. Who knew that there were 4 now? It's great. I wonder when we're gonna get 2 more casters. Maybe next. But because of that, you go, okay, so they're gonna handle those mechanics out there because melee have to be close. They have to do positionals sometimes, less than before. But the focus became uptime strats. So this has been a thing. This is always a thing. You're always going to look for uptime for your melee in every MMO that exists. While uptime is a thing, everyone has it. But as we've seen through the expansions, we've seen this easing of, let's say, mechanical difficulty for melee. I'm going to say this idea of infinite uptime and
Okay, the bus.
huge
Are you getting
hitboxes.
ready? Are you getting ready to toss people under it?
No, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. All right,
Do it.
It's fine.
Do it.
It's fine. I might. But this idea of having to have infinite uptime and the large hitboxes and the omnidirectional bosses, like what are positionals for at that point?
Well, and also easing the amount of difference between landing your positionals or not.
Yes, that's true. It
You want a difficult time? Go do. Okay, we said it was easy earlier. You go
Yeah.
fight Garuda while a tank is pulling Garuda across the
Yep.
arena, and its hitbox is like this big.
Yep. And that was planned for back in the day as an extra difficulty. And in some of the explanations, we had the explanation of the adjustment where we go into these taxes. One of the things that they said was they are reducing the difficulty for tank and melee DPS in the mechanics of these fights this tier. This is something that they said that they did. And you can really see that in the huge hitboxes. I mean, there's things on Twitter, like you can definitely find it. Someone had Shiva versus, I believe, Hegemony, P6S. And it's like, they're the same model almost. Like they look almost the same size. Why is she so huge?
Our samurai.
Dummy
Yeah.
thick.
You guys know what I'm about to say. Our
Sure.
freaking samurai just decided one night he was gonna in 7. He was just gonna jump around the whole time like a bard who just started.
Yeah.
They can
And
now.
you can.
Yep.
Just jump around, and I had to tell him to stop. I'm like, okay, you're distracting people. You're being crazy. Stop.
Yep.
Just stop it.
No, but he literally did. And the thing is, I don't even think it affected his
No, he just
No.
stands extra still for the cast.
Yeah,
And
he just jump all over the arena.
right. And we get into, okay, so positionals are hard, so we're easing it. And there's also True North, right? Which should be an equivalent to Swiftcast. You're looking at that mechanical complexity and you're removing it for a certain amount of time. For casters, it's one cast. Triple cast is a different thing. But True North is, okay, for a while, positionals are free. You can press that anytime you want. On casters, Red Mage, you could press it. It's in your opener, right? You need it in your opener. But you can use it anytime. You have dual cast. As summoner, your Swift cast is not a DPS cooldown anymore. It can be for Slipstream, but when it
Like
was
twice
for
a fight weight. You use it to
Yeah.
catch the potion at the very end.
Exactly, and that's it. It used to be used for Ifrit because it would be easier to skip one of those casts. But then the devs actually changed how Ifrit operated to give it the same cast and recast and to give it more damage, so you would de-incentivize just doing it, like just swift casting it. So it seems to be something that they design against as well.
Not only
So,
that,
mhm.
the freaking True North casts. It's not like a hit the button, you get one time. It's a timer. You get a countdown.
Sure.
You could do several, not even positionals during that time.
Yeah.
The way that our melee talk about it is like, I only have so many casts. No. Stop.
I mean, there's still difficulty. Like, there's still going to be difficulty, but there's this imbalance here between the things that you can use to get rid of your mechanical complexity on either side. And then we have the whole fact that the double melee meta is the meta, period.
Yeah. Well, when was the last time you saw a boss have to get moved out of the middle?
I mean,
Correct.
yeah.
This expansion, when's the last time you saw that? If in P1S, if you accidentally, like if you didn't gap close your pitiless flails, then the boss would walk out of center and then jump back middle.
Yeah.
Phoenix, you could pull it off if you wanted to like pre-position something, but other than that, you want the boss in the center, and it's so big that you can.
Yeah. And you can reach from everywhere. You know, I'm not going to talk about P7. That one truly gets me because it's like you can be anywhere and attack, period.
Well,
It
even
doesn't
in
really
Ultimate,
matter.
right?
Yeah.
Where in
Yeah,
Ultimate
even
do you move any of the bosses in DSR?
Nah. It's
And it one of my complaints whenever people bring this up about you're ranged, you can just go to the edges, it's fine. Okay, but I'm out there and I'm not getting shields and I'm not getting heals because all of you melee are way the heck out also, and I can't get closer because we're all about to be hit with a circular AoE. Can't kill you, you'll kill me. Can't get
Well,
closer.
that
can't get
became your
middle.
movement,
I know
right?
I'm dead.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your movement tax has been reduced from doing a mechanic to being out for a spread.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with these giant hitboxes, everybody is like, oh, well, I need to be way out. No, please scoot in. And that's a skill thing too as well. That's
Right.
like, tell your
Sure.
melee to stop fucking up. But
I was watching earlier, Ren, as you were doing P6S, like optimization. And that the uptime.
The uptime
You could
strat's so clean.
Oh my goodness.
It's
so
free
beautiful.
too. It's so clean.
completely
And there are
free.
spots on the ground. There's always, I'm going to tell you right now, there are
Yeah.
always places on every arena of every fight that exists that you can use that you don't need way markers for.
Mhm.
Way markers help, but there's always something on the ground you can use. And it was
Yeah.
only a matter of time before people found good uptime for everything.
Literally everything. So we've talked about movement. We see the problems there. We could talk about solutions in a bit, but the last bit of tax that I really wanted to talk about was the complexity tax, because they said that easy versus hard is a spectrum that they think about. How much should that count?
What do you consider to be hard?
Right.
Do you consider
it's
a high
completely subjective.
CPM to be hard?
Right.
Because Gunbreaker is like, let's say you were to take Gunbreaker and Dark Knight, right?
Mhm.
Because Paladin and Warrior is very low CPM. Dark
Yeah.
Knight is a lot of key presses, but it's the same key presses, right?
Mhm.
You're going to use a lot of shadows. You're going to use a lot of this, a lot of that. Gunbreaker has a lot of continuation, but again, it's just all the same buttons.
Mhm.
Or would you say Ninja is more complex because it has a lot of mudras and you have to remember the combinations?
Right. You get into complexity and it's so subjective that it has zero to no meaning at that point. Yeah, some jobs are easier to execute. I'm sitting here as a summoner, and I have said very, very many times that I would have to really try to screw up. I mean, yes, you have to have your correct sequence. Like, you don't want to do effort at certain times. That's cool. But one of the biggest issues here is that complexity of jobs changes without any warning, without any real consent in any way. Of course, we don't consent to most things. It's a game. It is given to us. We give our feedback. But summoner used to be thought as one of the harder jobs. It never was. It never was all that hard. Don't tell anybody it never was that hard. It's just pets sucked. But now, because of the reclassification of it as an easy job, and Reaper as well, right? Reaper is a bit easier than the other ones. You only have 2 positionals, blah, blah, blah. Not to count like double and shroud.
But you
all
also
of
have to
that
think about like 30 seconds in advance and know what you're
Yes,
going to do.
Exactly.
But conceptually, I guess, on paper, it's not a big deal because just do it.
Just do it.
Same thing
right?
with Paladin. Paladin's seen as something that's a little bit easy, but it's the spreadsheet tank.
Yes, it is. Like, you have to know what you're doing. So it's one of these things where it's completely out of alignment and it can change. You can go from, and I did go from, a class that could compete with everyone to a class that is literally hard capped below every melee.
Yeah, but you're good in UCOB.
Yeah, that's right. Go back in time and you're great. That's good. Go back to 70 because Summoner on a whole is a level 70 job where everyone else is at level 90. I've said that a few times. Like, it's the complexity.
That way,
of
in that case,
job
Reaper
anyway.
really does only get 2 buttons at level 70. So you're
Yeah,
fine.
exactly. It's
You're
going to
good.
be fine. So,
It also depends on what you're doing. Like
Yeah.
dancer is an easy job.
Mhm.
I hit the buttons in the right order. I do them very quickly. Just like smash my keyboard and I'm done with my burst.
Mhm.
Put me in the middle of something where I need to move around a lot. I have to still look at the procs and I missed that one and I missed this button and well, that sucks for me. And that could be a skill thing, but
Mhm.
that's an example. Depending on what you're doing at the time, and the RNG-ness of your job, it suddenly
Mhm.
becomes more difficult.
Sure.
Yeah, I think difficulty will literally always be subjective because the challenges that are unique to each person, their inherent intuitive ability to learn, to adapt, to change, any other considerations they have to take into account. I mean, yes, that will make something harder for you than others.
Mhm.
For me, in the past, when they have designed classes within a scale, the ones to me are oftentimes the ones that we refer to as like higher skill ceiling, which typically means that the class itself is less straightforward. So you have to get an understanding of how certain things dovetail together, like a puzzle almost, you know?
Mhm.
If I use this on this together, do that, I get increased potency, this thing, it affects that thing, it changes this, so, you know, like for me, I always found one of the most exceptional. I really did. I've talked about how much I loved Astrologian, particularly Stormblood era.
No.
But to me,
Yeah.
that was so fun because it was like a multi-channel brain puzzle. You know, like you're going through stuff and you're just doing your normal things, but then you have this constant background running. What do I have? That'll increase that. I could do that. I could get a spread. I could put this over here. Between this, I'm going to flip that card over. Then I'm going to go
This
over
is
here. So
trash.
it's-
Burn it.
yeah,
But then
this
you're
is
like,
trash,
okay,
burn it.
well, is this person in their Bahamut window or are they
Yeah.
not, right? Like,
Mhm.
or are you going to play the other type of healer? Because you were two jobs.
Yeah.
You were a shield healer and a regen healer.
Yeah, yeah, and
depending
I
on what you
liked
play,
those.
change it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the decisions, the ways those affected it, the way that cumulatively, yes, it probably did take you longer to really learn the class and really get intuitive with it. But as you did, you found you could multitask like nobody's business. And to me, I think that is the example in my mind of what is a difference between, I don't like to call them easy or hard classes, but like a simple versus complex job. And simple can also carry that weight with it. I don't think
Yeah.
there's anything wrong with a simple, or straightforward is maybe a better
Yeah.
word. A straightforward class where,
Beginner
you know,
friendly,
beginner
right?
Yeah, beginner
friendly,
friendly.
it's
Like I would say
straightforward,
warrior is a
nothing
very
chill.
beginner friendly job.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just started Final Fantasy 14, you want to play something, play white mage, play warrior. Those are not too bad. They have a couple of buttons. You'll pick it up.
Yeah.
The logic is clear. It's usually pretty linear. You have an idea, right? You can pick it up and be effective with it pretty quickly. Now, when we look at all of this within the idea of a complexity tax, it's really hard here because, as we have seen, I actually think the biggest factor in this is oftentimes the exact thing that you were outlining at the start, Aldino, the trickle-down effect in communities. Because something is harder and proficient players, again, using this as a relative term, proficient players who can learn the logic, do the button presses fast enough, do whatever it is, right, can get a certain higher potency out of it. That oftentimes means that every single person will be told to play that class.
Right.
Does that mean
Even if it's a
that in
mismatch.
yes, even if it's not a class that gels with them, even if the actual potencies that they are churning out are nowhere near what that higher skill ceiling would give, you will see that affect the community. So in those regards, I think them simplifying down classes to streamline them more hasn't been a bad thing with that in mind. But for my own player enjoyment, and especially in a game that literally spans entire eras of our lives because it's an MMO, I want to have some things that are, it's going to take me a little while to learn. And I
Sure.
want to be able to get really good at something long
That's what we
term.
refer to as the brain sparklies. I need
Yeah,
the
we
brain
want the
sparklies.
brain sparkly.
But they
But
do want things to be as accessible as possible, which
true.
means complexity must be sacrificed.
yes.
It's true. I
So
just think
it's a back
go-
and forth. Oh, I was just say it's
Yeah.
a back and forth, but it is one of those things where I think you cannot have it so that everybody does the same, but some classes you have to work 10 times as hard to get that same. I just don't
That
think
was-
it feels good.
Did you
Yeah.
play white mage?
Mm-hmm.
That was you for 3 years last expansion. While I worked
Yeah.
my butt off to optimize tank, and you press glare and beat the tanks for an entire expansion.
And I loved every
Unreasonable.
second of it.
I-
I rained my blood lilies upon the field and reaped obscene numbers, and I loved
Yeah.
it.
When
Um,
at the end of a raid night, when I go, yes, that was a clear. How did I do? I'm gonna consult the imaginary abacus. Okay, I'm a good number. Who's? Oh, yeah, that's a samurai at 16. That beat me at 61. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. My DPS relative to them literally doesn't matter. If I could play samurai at a half capacity, I would destroy my own DPS, right?
Yep.
And the complexity of samurai at half is probably comparable to summoner at full. I'm just gonna say probably, because summoner or samurai is hard to optimize. I'm not gonna lie, it is. There's
But
a
you could
lot
just
go into it.
get your stickers, pop your
Yep.
stickers, and continue.
And just do the damage. And that segues kind of neatly into the next one. And I'm sorry to even put this on here because it's just going to be fun to dance around. So in this imaginary
That's my
abacus, yeah, it's true. In this imaginary abacus that we all consult from time to time, there are some numbers. And yes, exactly. There are some numbers out there. And one of them is called RDPS, which is how that imaginary abacus ranks everyone by default, just in general. And there's a DPS, which is another number that we'll explain in a sec. That is just most of the time, sometimes, especially for selfish classes, a bigger number. What do they mean and why do you use them is something that a lot of people don't go into. So let's go to this explanation real quick. A DPS. If you see that in the imaginary abacus, it's actually called adjusted DPS, right? A lot of people call it active or actual. It's whatever, who cares? But that is just the simple count of your damage plus what you got from buffs, right? So if you think about that, it's your damage plus what you got from buffs. People who get buffed more have a higher number, right? And it also takes away, well, ADPS doesn't take anything away, but you just get that number. So for selfish classes, that's kind of what you look at, right? That's what you need to look at for selfish classes because they're not contributing to anyone else to this other number. Everybody get that, right? That makes perfect sense. And how are you feeling? Did I miss up? That's good.
No. You keep describing these fake numbers.
Okay, I'll keep describing these fake numbers.
We cannot endorse the use of imaginary abacuses.
Yes, we cannot.
I think the concept you just created sounds great in theory.
Yes, doesn't it? Isn't it awesome if we had that? And then there's another imaginary number called RDPS. Now remember, this is the one that you get categorized by default. Now this is raid.
This is the one that matters because it's the one you see.
Yes, exactly. That's the only thing that ever matters. Perception is reality, right? So raid contributing DPS is all of your personal damage, all of your buttons that you pressed, all of the damage you contributed to everyone else. So let's say you're that dancer and you buffed everyone. Your RDPS number is going to go up. It also subtracts the damage that other people gave to you, right? So it's a more fair number in theory because it takes into account, okay, I gave the party this much, I took this much, this is my true contribution to the raid, 100%. And it is a good metric to use for those less selfish jobs to see, okay, what am I actually bringing? Because my A DPS imaginary number would be lower because I do less damage, but I contribute more. So it's good to kind of have that balance. But that is so incredibly flawed because this is what we have in this imaginary abacus.
Yeah.
Is it even what the devs are looking at? That's a question that I've had for a long time.
If the devs are running 2 tanks with White Mage Sage, with double Samurai, Machinist, and Black Mage, then either metric is going to be the same.
Exactly. Right? It's one of those things where, are we completely off about the way we even look at this in the first place? It's a great metric, and this imaginary abacus is awesome. I'm just going to say it. I love it in general. I like the idea of having a way to know what your damage is. That would be cool if we had one. Just saying. But are there even any better metrics, right? And in my search, because I wanted to do some research before this, I've seen some people talk about a few things. And this is where I have to introduce the third number that this imaginary abacus introduced not too long ago, in fact, which is N DPS. And people look at that and they go, what the heck? There's another letter.
DPS.
Yeah, no DPS.
I only heal.
Yes, exactly. And this is, as they call it, neutral DPS. So this is your damage dealt independently. No addition of other people's buffs or buffs you gave to anyone else. This is just you. 100% you. The end. It would be a DPS minus what you took from the buffs, basically. So this one is kind of completely neutral, as they say. And this is a good one for people, how am I going to put dancers, bards, buffers, things like that, who have a party that might not be as powerful under buffs, right? It's a good way to see how much am I actually
people
doing.
Who pug.
Or people who pug.
That's what Alden was trying to say, for people who pug.
Exactly. People who don't have that level of...
You have best in slot, you just joined a clear party for P5, everyone's in crafted gear, and you're not going to do as much as that speedrunning static.
Yep, your imaginary all DPS.
You want to know if you're pushing all your buttons.
Yep. It's generally a bad thing if you look at your RDPS and it's a number, and you look at the NDPS and that percentage is higher. That's usually a bad sign, right? Not for you, but for your group. So that's another way to kind of look at this. And this is cool that we have all these metrics.
Yeah,
but I then saw...
What are you talking about?
Yeah, it'd be cool if we did have all the. You're right.
I like your theory.
Yeah, it's a great theory. One of these days, someone's going to put it in, right? Someone's going
Somebody
to
will
do
do
it.
that
Please,
in the
Yoshi
game.
P. One day it'll happen.
So
So
you're saying you're wondering how the devs think about it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if they just think about total damage and a composition dealt to the boss,
right.
which would be kill time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which
That's how I would think about it. Speedrun meta, in my opinion. Like, you're asking the wrong person, because if it were up
Sure.
to me, default would be speedruns.
I have
And
a
that's-
weird feeling. I have no idea if this is right at
Mhm.
all. That they would just go for neutral DPS. Because
You
if
just
they're,
go for whatever deals the most to the boss, right? You'd be
I
like,
mean-
all right, well, we're all
Mhm.
going to burst together, except for this person who needs to get an extra use here with this kill time, and then we're going to cheese limit break for this, which is something that obviously people didn't think about.
no.
I mean, I feel like if they're trying to make it so that you aren't dependent on any one specific thing, right? To me, it feels like they would be looking at that kind of data. But of course, they have to account for things like the buffs. I mean, I have no idea. It is interesting to think about, right?
Yes.
Because our priorities as players and their priorities and tools as developers, because they have real abacusses that they can
Yes.
use
They
as a
have
part of
real
their
abacus.
tools.
Real.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting to think about how they perceive this versus how we receive and experience it.
Right. And it's just one of those questions that I've had for a while. And there are other numbers. To me, I really like the kill time argument. I am with you there 100%, because that is the result of everything that you have done as a group. I really like that. And then you get to the individual and you can go from there. There's also this idea, and forgive me, it's going to get a little algebra, but not too much. I'm going to limit it. You have your imaginary ADPS, which is your full, everything you did, just the number. You have your RDPS, which is what you contributed and what was contributed to you. And then you have this personal. Now, theoretically, and I've seen this on the internet, and I agree with it somewhat, if you were to put those first two together, all of the damage that you did plus all of the damage that you did plus buffs and minus what you gave to people, and then take out your individual contribution, what you'd be left with is a somewhat bare bones metric of how much you contributed in general and kind of how much you contributed under buffs, because ADPS kind of fits that, because it's the result, right? It's the result without thinking about it. It's interesting. I don't know that that's the best way. It's kind of hard to understand, and I think that there's some outliers there without getting too algebra. I don't want to do that. But it's just going to show that we don't have a perfect way, right? And you've got to look at different imaginary numbers for jobs to really feel what you're actually doing. And it's so hard for us to get to the bottom of it that these community misconceptions or misalignments with the devs will never change. We will never know.
There's a bigger issue, though.
Yeah.
With people who... So, I mean... It's FF logs. People know it exists.
Yeah, of course.
We're not endorsing it, but it
No,
exists.
it exists.
The larger issue is that the community ends up swaying because at the end of the day, the person running the website is trying to do their best to make everyone happy. The community sways into more imaginary situations, which are literally imaginary, right? We're saying
Absolutely.
theoretically imaginary, but then they'll be like, well, these ads shouldn't count because then people will play like idiots to pad
Yes.
them. And like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, well, if they don't count, I'm not going to kill them, so then we'll keep wiping. Okay, well, that makes sense. All right, well, you shouldn't have this buff count because then people are going to misplay into it. And like, okay, that makes sense. Well, now that it doesn't count, we're going to misplay the other direction. Okay, well, that doesn't count. It all gets blown a little out of proportion. But at the end of the day, you're no longer even... And then like, well, there's downtime, so that shouldn't count.
Yeah, that shouldn't.
Because now people are only going to sandbag or find people going for first time clears and get it that way. But at the end of the day, you end up in a situation where it's a fake fight. You're no longer even measuring up your own standings in the actual encounter in the game. You're just like, here's this part of the fight, and then if we took out all the bells and whistles and fancy stuff, and I don't like broccoli, that's what I want. Can I just parse my opener?
Yeah, can I just do that?
Is that okay?
That's probably where we're gonna go in the future. Like, it's fine. Yeah, just parse the
That's
buffs.
kind of like where we're at.
Yeah, it's true.
Sort of. And then people are
very
just
true.
farming crit and
Before it was really, really prevalent, I remember looking for people for static and just having them do their opener in front of me.
was
Yeah.
enough, right? You're like,
Yeah, it
wow,
was.
cool. That's awesome.
Okay,
That's
you know
actually what we did back in Gordius. We're like, okay,
Yep.
you know how to push your buttons. You're great.
Yeah.
But you need these people who want to parse, by the way. You need
You
these
do.
people who want to optimize, because if
You need-
if the only people in Party Finder are people without statics who do not care about their damage, you will be miserable and you
Mhm.
will not clear. So you should be thankful that you have people who just got their shiny new weapon and they want to go in, because you know what? They're going to do what they need to do and they're going to be a
Mhm.
contributing factor. And if you have deaths, you're more likely to clear with them than you are with people who can't push their buttons.
Exactly.
Maybe they'll be greedy, but
Yeah.
it's walks of life for everybody. Honestly, though, I wonder if the devs are completely aware. Like, obviously, they have metrics
Mhm.
to view damage, right?
Yeah, of course.
If I were thinking about this and I wanted the race to be competitive and exciting, and you wanted those like screen fading to black clears,
Mhm.
I might be aware that some jobs just suck and
Mm.
just have it be that way. Or do I take the worst comp, make it so that they can clear together, and then people play the meta jobs and the race
And just
is
wreck it.
boring?
Yeah.
Right. So I almost wonder if it's intentional. They're like, well, for the majority of players in like 2 or 3 weeks, they'll be fine. On a
Mhm.
grand scheme of 6 months, it's fine.
Yes. And
I
that
think they
that just
at
has
least pick a midpoint though. You
I
know?
think they
it's-
did last year, but they also designed the first year to be a little bit weaker. I think like they said, they overtuned this one. I believe that.
it
I
just
think that's fine.
yeah, it's just because of the overtuning, we're uncovering issues that a lot of the community knew, but it's becoming a bigger focus for everyone now, and people are reacting to it. These were already there. These issues, these were underlying issues, right? They exist. They've always existed, but anyone can clear on anything because it was tuned in that way. But now, even their tuning knobs are having trouble adjusting to the meta that they've created.
We also had backup options before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, for example, if you're like, okay, well, we got to go do Suzaku so we can go get our weapons because we're at a wall. We can go
Mhm.
do that. Now it's like we had the Barbariccia weapons going in,
Yeah.
right? Or it's like, well, you know, we're going to break for the night. Let's run an expert or 3 so we can get our right side piece
Yeah, early.
and at least have a tone piece. But before it was like you were just crafted and whatever dropped.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You
So,
know,
learning experience. We
yeah,
knew
the
it wasn't
prob-
going to be smooth, or at least
Yeah.
I did. If anybody
Yes,
else thought that
exactly.
this was going to be completely seamless, then there's grass outside. Touch it.
Yeah. It sucks that they've kind of painted themselves into this corner. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they can get out of it, but it's a tougher climb than a lot of people have thought about it before we've uncovered these, right? The community was aware, like in certain spaces, but now it's everywhere. Everyone's making a video about it. Everyone's talking about it, and this is why it's going to be addressed. Constructive,
of course.
constructive criticism is what we need to do. Like, we need to talk about these things. So then that gets into how do we do this? How do we fix this? How do they fix this? Right. And I only have a few things here, right? And I figured we would talk a little bit about this. I know, I don't know how long we're going to go after this. It looks like we could go for a few more hours, but I don't know. So the first
You
thing,
know what? You talk about the next point for 3 minutes. I'll talk about it for about 90 seconds. Rook, you can talk about it for like 2.5 minutes. And then
Yeah,
you know what? Zen, if you want to come in and talk about it for 45 seconds after, and we'll sync up our conversation at 6
right,
minutes.
6 minutes. Yeah, exactly.
Perfection. Very good.
So this 2-minute meta that we were just talking about, do we do this? Do we return to 90, 180,
Yes.
45? Yes, you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
You
I think
screwed
so
my
too.
Bloodfest. I want it back.
You are not wrong. Like, when I started to look at Gunbreaker, I'm like, wait a second. That doesn't seem fun. Why is that there? What?
Boring.
Yeah. I don't get it.
I want to break down Gunbreaker real quick for anybody
Yeah.
in chat. So you have a 60-second rotation, and you get 25 GCDs in those 60 seconds. It's not exactly 25,
Yeah.
but it's close enough. 9 of those GCDs are in your burst window. Of those 9 GCDs, you need 3 to 4 cartridges to get them. That means you also have a Gnashing Fang window outside of your No Mercy. So you have 9 GCDs there, plus your extra Gnashing Fang. That's 12 GCDs. You have 13 left over, right? For those 4 cartridges, you need to do your combo 4 times to get that. That's 12 GCDs. You have 1 GCD left over, meaning you can't really screw up.
Yeah.
With the 90-second Bloodfest before, you could, and that's not even screwing up downtime, right? Or
Yeah,
you
downtime.
die. So Bloodfest on 90 seconds before allowed you to be more versatile with death or downtime or just playing.
You could, for me, and this happens a whole lot, you're just like in that window, you have these numbers of GCDs. You only have one that you can mess up. And someone is about to get hit and and you're like, I could use my cool Heart of Corundum and really save them. But that might make me clip this GCD.
That's going to make it and everything's the next expansion, everything's going to have a continuation.
Oh, yeah, most likely. You're right. I mean, that's the expansion that we're seeing. So if we were to move back to it, are there really any downsides other than the skill ceiling somewhat expanding?
No, I don't think so. I think you put yourself back in a situation where creativity is born.
Yeah.
Rotations can be changed, which means that there is optimization to be had. And so right now they did it for the sake of complexity, right? But if you mess up at all, then you're going to be out for the rest of the fight.
The entire,
Which means that, and it's easy to just say play perfectly, right? But if you're thinking about these entry-level raiders, they're going to play less optimally and less consistently than people who have been playing the game for a long time. They're more likely to make mistakes, which means you're punishing them more if you think about it. On paper, it looks fine, but then you actually get into the real world where mistakes are going to be made. Maybe I got a knock on my door. Maybe I got a phone call. Maybe I'm just not good yet.
Yeah.
You're going to make mistakes. And the other side of it comes to, they made all these 2-minute burst windows, but potions are still 4.5 minutes, which means that you're getting one at 4.5 and then one at 9.
Yes.
Ugh.
Yes.
It hurts
It's
so
so
bad.
awkward. I agree. I mean, even if they don't want to strictly move back to 90, 180, I mean, whatever they would want to do. I
Make
do
your
think
potions 4.
Yeah, I do think that the 2-minute meta is not something that I want to see become a backbone and script for design of every single class from here on out. Like, how are we going to structure the class? Well, we have to make it fit with a 2-minute burst window. So guess we'll script it like this or script it like that. I think
How many different ways can you make a job?
Yeah, I mean, like, that just sounds like the most, I don't know, inspiration robbing thing that you could do. It's so, I feel like just making that some kind of formula for every class moving forward is not the way to go. So I definitely think we need to get rid of it or do something.
We made it work before. We
Yeah,
made
it was
all the
fine before.
rotations fit together before. And did that
For years.
require a little bit extra research sometimes on somebody's part? Sure. But
Yeah.
if you really
Resources
care about
exist.
your job, go do it.
Yeah.
Go look.
And they will
There are great
continue to
resources.
exist.
Yeah, there are great resources out there. Rook, what you were saying with it paints you to a corner. I'd like to say it just limits your design space, right? You can't design that job in this way. So, okay, I think we all agree 2-minute meta. So that's feedback that we got out of this. Okay, that we should destroy it. All right, here's the next question. Casters raise. Tax less? Removed? Now, they already planned this for Summoner.
They want to remove it from Summoner. I think
Yeah.
that's fine. Honestly
Yeah.
speaking, do whatever, man. If you're only gonna have it's 11 jobs right now with more to come.
Yeah.
2 of them out of 11 can res.
Yeah.
Like it was different when it was like a couple years ago, and it was like, okay, well, there's only like 8 jobs, right? Or only like 6 DPS, so you have like 2 of them that can do it.
What if they implemented, like, they have an 11 re-raise items?
Man.
I could
Take
see
care
that
of your
happening.
own raise.
Yeah, you do it. Well, if and here's the dangerous precedent that they are at, and this design space is limited so much already. What happens if you remove it from Summoner? Does it do as much damage as a black mage?
Oh my god, it would need a
Well,
buff so bad.
It'll need to,
can't.
but that's kind of what they want to get to, right?
Yeah.
They want it to be at that point, but then it becomes a free moving physical DPS
Exactly.
with a raid buff.
Yes, it becomes what machinists wish they were. Right at that point, they become the selfish caster with a buff that machinist doesn't even have. So it then knocks against machinist. It then does red mage keep the raise? I could see it because red mages use white magic. It makes sense thematically. But if they do, then they're the designated bottom.
That's a question.
Yeah.
What if everything became pretty bare bones this expansion?
Mhm.
Because at level 99 we get sub job specialization.
It would be
Don't
my
get
dream.
people worked
That would
up
be
about
nuts.
that.
My
Don't.
dream.
I mean, yes, that would be so fun. Or even if they just we're really making space so that they could add in a different level
Yeah,
of
the forecast.
complexity, you know, in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form. It'd be great. I would love
Yeah.
that.
That's
Yeah. Because right now we have this. You want to bet? Well, we'll bet. I don't think we can do that on Twitch anymore. However, fourth caster, we think there's gonna be one. Sorry, third
Gotta
caster.
be.
Someone that doesn't count anymore.
it's
But
all I would do, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't want two jobs. One,
Yeah.
if anything.
mhm,
Or the sub job thing could at least be a way where maybe like there's a specialization between roles or something,
Yeah.
so it makes the role more unique.
do
I
they
don't
have a
know.
raise or don't they? Right? With numbers, they shouldn't. Okay. How do you design that caster that will have to need to do as much damage as Black Mage, or just at least more than Red Mage and Summoner if you don't remove that raise? How do you get into that? That is such a narrow design space for yourself at that point. What did they do? It's an issue, right? And I don't have a solution for that one. We would have to remove raise or adjust it in some way before that. That's just what it is there. Any other thoughts?
I'm still over here being excited about sub jobs.
Yeah,
like-
I mean, oh my
like,
goodness. If I'm
Adding more jobs, like you said, is at this point there's so many, and we saw just
Mhm.
adding 2 this time upset this great balance that we had.
Mhm.
I could see maybe adding 1 at a time into perpetuity, but also
Yeah.
it's weird because they got rid of the like sub job esque thing by getting rid
Yeah.
of the like subclass.
Yeah,
thing
now
we had to
everything's a
do
role
before.
action.
Yeah,
stuff.
but also it's an interesting concept. I enjoy this thought. It is giving me the brain tinglies.
right, it'd be great. That gives you, once again, more design space, right?
Mhm.
What are they going to bring as that sub job? Well, if you need a raise, sub job raise. You know what I mean? Like in your specific circumstances, and of course, it could expand from there. The other question is, do we need to realign utility versus selfish? Like, does Machinist now get support to bring it in line with everyone else in its role?
Does
Or
Dragoon
do
get a
they-
defensive?
Yeah, oh my goodness. I didn't write that down, but I wanted to because
We used
Ugh.
to like sort of complain about this. Like,
Yeah.
shouldn't the jobs that have more quote unquote support, shouldn't they only be have a little bit more damage? But honestly, I'm tired of them making everything so samey.
Mhm.
If the identity and the level of fun of the job comes back by making them more different, do it.
Mhm. yeah.
It's been interesting to see because right around the time that we've had all of this discussion with 14,
Mhm.
Guild Wars 2, who in many certain areas, they have a lot of different game modes, and because there are so many build possibilities for classes, balance in that game is an absolute monster. It's just an absolute monster. But they just had a new team lead step in and talk a bit about their design mentality moving forward. And they themselves in that talked specifically about the fact that for many years they have designed around a tax system, just like this,
Mhm.
and that they have made these certain trade-offs. And as they went through it, they were saying, but we realized that because of how you build and all the other stuff that's involved in this, right? The only thing this does is make people feel bad.
Yeah.
And that it really is
It's not
something-
sustainable. It's
Yeah.
only
No fair.
sustainable for what it's meta, right? Like,
Yeah. So they themselves just recently, I think, and I'll be very curious to see how this actually pans out. I have no idea, but this will be an experiment into that kind of horizon because they said we have decided to remove the tax. And
Yeah.
that for, moving ahead in design, that it's something that we do feel is antiquated in like a perception of how this has to be in games. And so they're removing that. Now, how they account for that, how they don't
Yeah.
make that, I guess, wildly OP, how they deal with that, I have no idea exactly, but it is something that I will be keeping an eye on. I'll let
Yeah.
everybody
Yes.
know as we go through
Honestly,
because
That's
I
pretty
can't
exciting
help-
for us because we know that our dev team looks at other games and
Yeah.
and the choices that they made and how they've affected
Yeah, as
player
they
base.
should.
So if this works out for Guild Wars 2, I definitely could see them trying it in 14.
I mean,
well, Zen, you play Fizz ranged, right? What's your class? What's your favorite? Dancer? Would you stop playing Dancer if it did the same exact damage as Monk? Or as Red
No.
Mage? Or would you just keep playing Dancer?
And the first one, same damage as Monk? No, I would play that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Red Mage?
I mean, if every single DPS job did the same damage, would you stop playing the one you
no,
like?
no.
That's kind of what you have to look at, right? Like,
Yeah.
this game is great. So if you secure job identity and everything just does the same damage, you can have complexity across the job. Some people want complexity, some people don't. So you have jobs where people don't have complexity and they can play those. And you have ones where they do have complexity and they can play those.
And you know, I talked in the past about that misalignment of effort to reward, and maybe some people might be like, okay, well, I'm playing the harder job and I'm not getting that much more out of it.
Like
There are
White Mage
ways
beat
to-
Astro, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But people
there are
still
ways to
liked playing
mitigate that.
Astro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The job identity is the way to fix that. The fun, the brain tingles, right?
Yeah.
I think
And
that
like,
it's doable.
Like Brooke said earlier in PvP, a lot of people love the new PvP just because each job has so much identity in it now.
Right. All right. So the last question, and this is one of my favorite ones. So melee range mechanics we talked about, huge hitboxes, we talked about all this sort of stuff. Can there be more forced, specifically melee downtime? And if so, what mechanic would force melee downtime but not affect anyone else? Do we have examples? Because it's hard to do,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Conflag strike, E6S Fuhrer. Tanks had to walk away and tomahawk for like 15 seconds taking tank busters.
Okay. Yes, we can make it hard on.
You
the
could
tank,
do
that's for
black smokers from Leviathan and make it pick a melee.
sure. Okay. There you
Yeah.
go.
I'm
That's
thinking,
one for sure.
Shit. We talked
You
about
could
this the other
do
night.
the
Manipulator.
Protean waves on T with Living Liquid, where you had to have everybody's trade off and go out, right?
Oh, sure.
This doesn't quite apply, but a manipulator, when
Mhm.
it
You got
plucks
jailed?
people up. Yeah, you got in the jail.
Mm-hmm.
Just specifically
pull 'em away.
melee. You give
Well,
it a little bit of still punching.
I brought up A7 earlier as well. We have the jails, right? So
Yeah.
like somebody picks you up and takes you away. Sure, yeah, you could do that.
Yeah.
I have a
It doesn't
really-
have to be like down for the count where you're stuck
Exactly.
for 4 seconds
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
pressing a button.
I have a really hot take,
Okay.
which is that I think that if they did that, right,
Mhm.
all melees would be upset about the fact they were forced to do all this annoying stuff that ruined their rotations.
Yeah,
You're not wrong.
I hated
everybody feels
E6S
so.
as a
Yeah.
tank with that
Yeah.
until we could skip it.
Yeah.
So, what if we just got rid of True North?
Oh boy. That's
What
the
if-
only
Well,
adjustment.
I mean,
Well,
no.
because think about it. Because then, if there are mechanics like where you or minimized it or extended out how long it, like the duration was, or did something, because that makes it so that people can't cheese as much. Like, you know, like cheese in the sense, I know sometimes you genuinely have to use it specifically for mechanics, but cheese in the sense that, like, I'm not going to even try to do the positionals because whatever, I don't need it. I've got True North and then I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Or, I mean, it also then does penalize more, like you really paying attention to like how you can
When you need it.
absolutely be where you need. Does that lead to more deaths? Does that lead to more? I maybe. I don't know. I don't play melee as a main.
It might
right
lead
now.
towards aggression towards the tanks who have turned the boss in a way that you can't get your
Could.
positional. I really think smaller hitboxes and having things where you move the boss, like right now with like Ruby 5, right,
Yeah.
for Carbuncle. I don't know if you all do it where you split light parties on one side of the arena and the other.
Yeah.
We only had one melee, so in progression we actually just pulled the boss to a corner and put both tanks, the melee and a healer in one corner. And now in Party Finder I just put both tanks and both melees in a corner, and you have enough time for the healer to come over and do the stack afterwards. So just
Yeah.
things like that where you can actually innovate and create uptime with strats. For people willing to put the work in, that would be good. That would be engaging. That would make tanking more fun.
Sure.
I also
Yeah.
see in chat the remove positionals, which I could see that being a thing. Like, I won't lie, just completely removing positionals is a thing. But
Basically
to me,
Reaper.
I feel like that would require, though, almost a rework of melees, in the sense that you can have. I think there is. Okay, let me try and put my thoughts together on this.
Yeah, no problem.
When I think about other games where they do an equivalent of something like a melee fantasy execution kind of thing, what I think about are fighter games, like where you're doing combos, where you're chaining, you know, you're putting different things together, kind of like ninjas, you know, with the different mudras and everything. Where you have almost more of that's the kind of interactive element where you are combining these different things into a chain, or like combining your strikes, right? Lining up an attack, doing something aerial, doing something low, doing something, those sorts of
Sure.
things. The monk strikes to like that exact vital point. Monk meaning like not specifically just Final Fantasy 14, but like the monk archetype.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I think if they remove something like that, it might require a slight rework of design
Sure.
mentality and we've seen some of that shifting a bit with some of the redesign and how they've done things, or like new interactive elements that they tried to do with Monk and stuff like that. But I think they'd really have to go whole hog in it.
Yeah, if they
Give
did
it
that.
its own.
You would have to completely recreate like half the jobs.
Yes.
You would have
If you were going to keep them the way they
some-
were, you were going to remove positionals, you would just have to create forced downtime.
Yeah.
That would be the only complexity, because otherwise it would just be free. I mean, for people that, if you guys think that it's artificial difficulty now,
Yeah.
you should have. I was a Dragoon main until patch 3.4, and let's take, what was it? Hullbreaker? No, Sastasha hard mode had the Kraken at the end.
Yeah.
Literally, a boss that did not turn. The rear was inaccessible, and if
Mhm.
you missed a positional back then, you dropped your combo
Yep,
completely.
that was it.
And you could not do your combo there.
Whoa.
So we've come a long way.
Yeah.
I think
and-
you'd have. I can't say it would be 50-50 because I don't know, but you'd have some people who were like, "Yes, it's easier. Hooray! I don't have to deal with positions ever again." And then you'd have the other people who
You'd
were
have
like,
people quit.
"What the
Yes.
hell? This is boring, brain dead job. Now I don't want it." Mm-mm.
You'd
Yeah.
have people literally quit the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough. That's to me one of the toughest ones, other than just reverting the hitboxes back and then letting people get the complexity of positionals out in their own way, in their own skill expression with uptime strats. Uptime strats will never go away. They literally have to exist because there are roadblocks in the way to uptime, and you want to get the most damage that you can get. People are going to get around, and I think that that's fun to play around. I just think that it's too free right now. That's it. If it was a little less free, that's
I
okay.
don't
Recreate P8S, but have the boss targetable the entire time during high concepts.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know that the way positionals are right now are necessarily a bad compromise.
Yeah.
They took some away, and you still have some, and it's
Mhm.
like somewhere
It's
in
potency.
between.
Easier than
Yeah.
it's ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
Right
easier
now,
than
it's
ever.
easier than it's ever been.
But I
Free
love to
uptime,
watch.
and the only thing you have positionals, and half the bosses don't even have
Yep.
positionals.
Yeah, I think that really is the issue. But I love to
Yeah.
watch like old school dragoons and monks still try and do their positionals. Like
Oh,
you don't have
yeah.
to do that, buddy. But it's
just stuck in your
cute.
brain.
It's cute.
I do it. I still,
Yeah.
my Dragoon, if I go to my Dragoon hotbar, I still have some of my thrusts in multiple buttons, because even though it's only one button for your combo starter now, it didn't used to be.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
I
did.
just like the idea. Sorry, I just had a sudden
Oh, no,
brain
it's fine.
flash.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, hear me out. What if
Mhm.
we alter positionals
Uh-huh.
to something like flanks, where if you are flanking with another player,
Oh,
you give them some kind of buff or boost or debuff the boss instead of it being like affecting your own potencies. I think that would totally
So
change.
what, like you
way.
trick attack the left flank?
Yeah, something like that, or like I'm thinking
Like a
Monster Hunter.
reverse Ravana situation or
when
something?
you flank in D&D,
oh,
right?
drawing a line through them.
Yes, like when you
I
draw a
see.
line through an enemy with another ally on the opposite
You
side,
get advantage, yeah.
you get advantage. And I don't know. I mean, I think that would also be something they'd probably never do.
Be
But as a
interesting.
concept, I like the idea, especially
Yeah.
if there was something even off of like, if you're always south, you're probably
And
gonna
I
be
thought of the same thing
Hey.
like that with like Black Mage. Imagine if your ley lines granted other casters something.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, like I just think that there could be something there where if they didn't want it to necessarily be this factor that they're taking into account,
Mhm.
that they're having design fights around, or that they're like compromising, or like these things, that if they wanted to instead expand out what melee does, but still have a sense of that strategic positioning, you could have it be something like that. I mean, even just for maybe a new class concept where you're across from the tank, maybe that does something different. You're across from a healer that's on the other side and you draw a line there. I don't know. I have no idea, but it might be
It's an
a
interesting concept.
It's
Yeah.
an idea, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun to think about, which is why I think it's been going through the community, because it's such a hot topic. It's fun to think about. You get to stretch some of your design skills for everyone because you've been playing this game. You understand. There's different levels of understanding, but you understand how at least you play and what would be interesting to you. So that's why there's so many answers here. And this last whole category, the last bit of this outline is, but does it really matter at all? Because that's the question at the end of the day, right? Does it even matter? Like we're over here malding about it, not really, but a little bit.
Depends.
It depends. It really does. I think the first thing I say here is no, it doesn't, because you can 100% clear on any job with any composition within reason right now, probably. If you're good
And if
enough,
all you do is deep dungeon, you don't even care about rating.
it doesn't even matter. You craft or gather remains, that's cool. Island sanctuary mains, you're out there. who cares, right? Why are we even talking about this? There's small number differences between jobs. Like they are small. I mean, I think it's maximum like 10% to 15 it might be, to like seriously maximum between the top and the bottom, but I can't remember. I haven't looked at that imaginary abacus in a while, and it's going to continue to grow because of gear, then people not having and then having, and it's just going to be weird. But yes, it's true, you can clear with any composition. It's small comparatively. You look at WoW and those are numbers that anyone can see and they're perfectly fine with it. And the state of WoW balance is number 1 has at least 50% more DPS than number 2, and it's okay. That's fine. In WoW, if you're a priest, I'm about to trigger you. Power infusion. There's a single target buff that is so awesome that you can use on yourself, but you don't. No. You give it to the highest damage dealer, and you go, all right, I have to. Or people fight over it. Like, there are games who are in worse situations. But as we said, like, these underlying balance issues aren't going anywhere if they don't fix it. That's a moving target to balance against. And at some point, I really feel, and it might just be me, but I really feel that we're in danger of a last tier being literally unclearable again, completely with the composition. I don't know how we don't see that. It's going to be so hard to balance that. You say, okay, next time they just bring it down by that 1%. But what are they going to change in between, right? And can they test all of it?
Next time we get relics to carry us.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's going to add...
Eventually.
Yeah, that's going to add even more. Mm-hmm. So, there's that danger. We're never going to be able to actually know what the true DPS numbers are. We have this awesome tool in FF logs. We do. It's accurate. It is, but it's to our... expectation, right? We think that this is the way that it works. Is it? Is it really? How do we ever know? And are they using that, And then the split runs, right? Like, that is a fate. To me, that's a fate worse than death. Like, once again, I hurt myself.
From somebody who's been doing split runs since Heaven's Ward,
yeah,
it's fun.
Oh, is it fun for you?
It depends on your group.
Yeah.
Depends on your group. It's fun to not have to do 16 weeks of getting upgrade items.
That's true. That's 100% true. I mean, I'm a raid logger.
Like, I like raiding, right?
Yeah.
So for me to get to do a fight twice a week with my team, pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean,
but it depends.
Yeah, some people aren't going to have that time. Like I said, literal world first and WildStar for a few bosses, I nearly killed myself, like, by hurting myself playing so long. 300 pulls in like a couple of hours because we were dying. I get it. And then split running on top of that, like, it's insane. Some people like it, some people don't. It's going to make some people bounce off, and you need every end game raider you have.
I mean, I'll tell you right up.
This time we were up 2 hours before reset. Like, as soon as reset hit, and then Savage came out 2 hours later, we ran the dungeon like 13 times, like All's Legacy, like 13 times.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think that for those who want to run endgame content, they will always do it. They will make alts, they will run additional, they will do it, they will find a way to have fun with it, they will kit out their alts, etc., etc., etc. The problem for me is if you start getting into something where this is what you have to do to even be on par with anybody else, or where, like you're saying, it's putting so many even involuntary hours on top of everything, or sheer amount of actual cost that goes into trying to do this that leads to an environment. Like, one of the big things that we saw with WoW, right, was there was a lot of discussion when I was casting that. It was so informative to cast that race, honestly, because of the fact that competitors who wanted to race for worlds first were literally prohibited from even getting in there to be on the streams, to be in the running, to be on anything, not just because of time commitment, right? Like, do they have a large enough team, alt subs, that if they're splitting and doing all these split runs, they have enough people to fill them in, to give the gear, to do the stuff, to alternate the things, to even have it so that if one person that's on your team can't get a drop for the class that they want, they're benched. So you have to have somebody else in there. So, like, when you start looking at the way that it can start to go, it creates all these gateways, including the actual financial costs, like both in-game currency and out-of-game currency, where many of the
becomes an actual job, right?
Yeah, it becomes
an actual job.
And like that's not going to be the case for the vast majority of players, but when we start looking at the accessibility of the raiding scene, as well as the visibility of things like even being able to be in the game to try. If your team's in 14 and you're like, I don't know, why don't we just try for Race to World first this time? You can do that. I mean, I think even at this point with splits and things the way they are, you can do that and try to do that and commit to it. And of course, you're going to have to commit to a lot for that, but you can. Versus literally not even being able to be in the running because you don't have thousands of dollars or thousands upon thousands of hours and a guild that has 10,000 people. And like, you know what I mean? So I think that it's okay, but I do worry about it because I never want, one of the things I always praise about 14 is the fact that really so much of the fights, and one of the things I even spoke about while I was casting the Race to World first, we watched as teams who should be casting Prague literally for days were just running a dungeon 100 times, and people were
You get
coming
those
in,
bind on equips and stuff, right?
people were coming in like, why aren't they actually doing the fights that came out? And all that those raiders wanted to do was do the fights that came out.
Right,
So,
but they were doing this required progression.
yes. And
The homework.
14 has been so good about that, where if you want to engage with these fights, you do your prep ahead of time, you get in there, like you can start raiding. And I just hope we don't push too far beyond that. I actually think the week delay was nice. I enjoyed having a little more time and being able to unlock.
Oh yes,
But
please keep that the same every single time. I could tell you right now, the single best part about that was not like raid day happens, Savage goes live, servers are on, and you get in 7 out of 8, one person. I'm 1500 in queue. Okay, we'll see you in 45 minutes.
Yeah,
and you can't start. It's like best part about it was actually being able to be online and play. It was so good. And the other thing is like a big difference from WoW, right? So I race. I mean, I would like to win, and I've placed highly in a few races, but my number one thing is doing the fights blind. So like not having a public test realm is actually something I love because you can only solve the puzzle once.
Yes. It's that aspirational content, right? To me, an MMO is sick if there is no aspirational content. If you don't see someone in some gear and go, oh, how do I get that? And it gets you to hop across that barrier that people see, I'm too casual, I can never do that. You can. Look at them. They're doing it. And when you put barriers in place, your MMO starts to die. Don't at me, WoW players. You know it's true, right? Like that's part of this issue.
Well, the barriers being your skill level, I think is fine, right?
That's
like
fine.
Take UCOB for example. You're like, wow, that's a shiny weapon. Where do you get that? And you're like, well, it's from the Unending Coil of Bahamut. It's the highest difficulty. You're like, oh, well, it's harder than extremes. I'll never do it. I think that's fine, right? You're like, practice. You'll get good enough. Do it. But something like 30 hours of prep time in order to get in.
Yeah, that's you can't do it. And that dissatisfaction at the top end, this is how it does trickle down, because it's dissatisfaction at the high end, and people go, how do I get in the rating? And they go, you don't want to do that, right?
Like you're gonna have to farm this for a while, right? And it's gonna be a lot of like remedial, like it's just a lot of work. And you're like, I don't want work. I want fun.
Yeah, I want to play a video game. You know what I mean? And this is why we're talking about this. And my last bullet point, and I mean this 100%. The other reason that this matters is machinist. Just the whole job of machinist, not because it is you can clear with it, and it can be fun, but because of the community perception, people who get into it are like, yeah, I love it. They hear that it's crap, they go, oh, I'm playing that job that nobody likes.
At least the other weak jobs have something.
Yes.
Red Mage has reses. Paladin has extra mitt for the party. Like everybody's got Reaper even has like a heal overtime that they can proc, right? And I guess the job feels a little fun to play, but Machinist is like, why are you here?
Yes. What are you doing?
I just
and
want
if
to
you
let
have high
everybody
ping,
know.
why?
Let everybody in chat know this doesn't say just machinist. It says machinist sad face.
Yes, there is
It
a
does
sad
say
face.
Machinist sad face.
I mean, it's so it really is a problem that they have to fix. And because they didn't say anything specifically about machinist in any of the communication, a lot of people were like, well, okay, well then I guess that's it. You know, I guess it'll never change. And they go, well, am I going to change jobs or am I going to stop rating? Well, there's already Island Sanctuary. Maybe I'll take this tier off, you know.
PvP. Machinist is fine
PvP.
there.
Yeah, you have this chilling effect on your top end group, which yes, they can be intense. Yes, we know hardcore players can be intense, and sometimes opinions from them can be strong, but they're part of the beating heart of the game just as well as casuals, right? You need everyone, and I don't mean casual as a slur. I mean people who really just play to go to Limsa and go, who's here? Let me just talk to them. It trickles down all the way to them, because some of those people standing there are people in their ultimate gear going, hey, I'm just chilling. Hey, who are you? Let's talk, right?
Yeah.
If you start losing
done with
that,
all the content. They want to hang out
Yes.
now too.
yeah,
It's a real bummer when the PvP version of your class is like more cool and interesting.
yeah,
I mean, it's just, I mean, even with some of the thematic design, and I
Yeah.
honestly am still so baffled by the fact that when they did this queen reduction,
Ugh.
they didn't take into account the animation for coming in, so that your timer starts literally, half of it is consumed by just the queen being summoned into the field.
How
They
about
have,
Dark Knight too?
yeah.
I
Their
mean,
pet
yeah.
system's
Dark Knight
not
too.
great.
It
It's
is
just
the worst.
it's very awful, and that feels terrible, because
Yeah.
that is what you are building to in your class. That's
Mhm.
theoretically the big cool thing that you get to do. And
Yeah.
then to have this moment where it's barely on the field, and then you're like, what? Bye. Oh, bye.
Bye.
And then you go into
Yeah.
PvP, and it's like, I can crouch on the opposite end of the field, and I line up my sniper shot, and I look at the field, and I find that one white mage, it's Rook. I'm going to kill
You're
her.
dead.
Right? Like,
You're already
there's-
dead.
there's a sense of thematicness to that, and it's
Yeah.
fun, and it's interesting, and it's distinctive, and you feel powerful. And so really, I mean, with Machinists, we talked about how some of these things affect, maybe just the raid community. But when we have classes that do just not feel great to play, period, the class fantasy is maybe a little bit like, eh. And even if you are running it in other content, I mean, I know people who said recently, like, I was running a dungeon and I had a dancer, machinist, or something, and it was like considerably longer than I normally take to go through the dungeon, or this or that. I mean, that creates all the way down to the bottom a sense of like unhappiness with how it feels to play, how it even feels in content outside of endgame, how it, how the fantasy
Yeah.
sells itself to you so that you want to play it and enjoy it. So I do think Machinist definitely, it needs to be added to that list. I'm like, why
Yeah.
is Dragoon on here? But Machinist
Yeah.
is
Like what?
of classes we're gonna do things
Alternate
for.
idea.
Uh-huh.
Instead of everything being balanced for raid content, what if the other content like Bozja, like Eureka, like Deep Dungeon stuff, what if the classes that are really weak in raids are really strong in the other content where they could give you extra actions and
Sure.
stuff, other skills and stuff? I think that'd be super cool. Warrior was an amazing duelist in Bozja. An amazing
right.
duelist. So was White Mage. It was exceptional. So why not let those jobs that kind of suck be really, really strong there? And then there's something for everybody.
Yeah. I tend to rankle against that because I was a red mage in 11, and because of the exploits of one very good soloing red mage was deep sixth, right? Because red mage could do everything in that game. So I get that, and I agree with it. There's just, like you can go wrong, but I think there's less to go wrong in that case. I think you're right in that.
It's also really sad when it is your favorite job, but you maybe hate the content it's good at.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, at that
There's
point,
But it's better than it being weak in everything.
yes, in
That's true.
everything. Yeah. But that's the end of the outline.
Sure
I
is.
hope I had so much fun in this conversation.
Do we have anything else we've forgotten or want to add?
Yeah, anything else at all?
I feel like we touched on most
Yeah.
major things with this. I mean, this has
I-
been a huge topic in the community. Many people have been talking about it, podcasts. I
Mhm.
get asked about it a ton, even on stream.
Yeah.
I know many of us do, right? It's something that is interesting and is important. So I think for players across the board, we all have to, engage in a sense with the health of our game on all different levels, right? Including something like these greater balance discussions, whether or not they immediately affect you, or, maybe they are affecting you in ways you don't even know, or maybe they're affecting other people and that affects the game as a whole. So it's good to talk about these things, but of course, never to like lambast or,
No.
cause harm.
politely.
Yes.
Yeah, and that goes for anybody. If you see that sweet machinist running in their content, you let them live their best life. But
Yeah.
it is something to consider. And for the future of the game, I think this is going to be a big
Right.
crossroads for them in how they want to design, whether they can continue to narrow things down and homogenize, or they decide to try to redesign and open and branch out in different ways.
Yeah.
So
I think with the with the rampant difficulty that we got this tier, in addition to the Savage tier, we also got Sephiroth, which is way stronger of an Unreal than Ultimate Weapon. I think this goes for everybody. Just try to practice a little bit more patience and understanding with people who you may even find somebody who's going to be an absolutely fantastic, flawless raider, doesn't make mistakes, who plays a job you don't want. And you never would have gotten them in there if you didn't allow the job. And you might let somebody in who's like a monk main or something, and they're just greedy and just wiping you continuously. So just try to be a little bit more understanding of everybody's time and effort, because it's not like people are wasting your time. We're all playing the game together. It's all our time. And if you do have an opinion, be vocal about it, be constructive about it, put it on Twitter, go to the official forums, talk about it in streams. Just try to be part of a solution, basically.
Yes.
Don't be part of the problem, right? And if you find yourself getting mad, just step away, take a break, or talk about it.
Yep.
If you're mad because of a grievance that you have with the game, that's okay. If you're mad because you feel like somebody is just not a good player, that's not really that constructive, because we're all allowed to be good and bad at the game. It's open to everybody. So if somebody, maybe Rook just got home from work and had a really long day, and you spaced out 2 or 3 times on a mechanic, and to me that's just unacceptable. So get out of my party. You probably bought your clear, right? No, just
Zanidra says that to me all the time in raid.
Wow.
just
I like
be a
to
little
think I'm
bit more
very
understanding.
kind.
I'm
We're
kidding.
all
I'm
playing Final
joking.
Fantasy. I'm never playing with Zanidra after hearing that, though. Like, that's toxic. I
Aldino
can't.
who does it, not Zanidra.
Yeah, it's
so,
definitely not. Look, I've pushed to talk. I always push to talk in raid because WoW turned me into that raider, right? Like I was that raider. I was on Elitist Jerks. I was making articles. I was the DPS officer in a top 200 guild at the time in Lich King, and I was that Elitist Jerk. And you can't be. You cannot be that person. You can be.
It's also okay to
yourself.
vent, though.
Yes,
It's okay to be like, look, I'm sorry I called you stupid. I had a long day. I was heated, right?
Yeah.
And you own it, right? And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's okay to get upset, especially if you're playing in a static, right? Because chances are, if you guys are in a static and you're still working on the tier and you're not done yet, you're probably starting to get a little frustrated, because it gets to the point where maybe Zanidra's progging way faster than Rook, and that's why Rook is doing PvP, right?
all the time, and I don't do any of my tombstones. It's only PvP.
Yeah. And then you show up to raid without tombstone gear, and then you get yelled at for not doing your tomes because you're not as committed, right? And you're going to get to those points now where it's going to start to be more glaring issues, especially when we're going to get the live letter. They're going to probably tell us the date for 6.25, and that's when we get Criterion and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the fire's really going to start burning under people, because they're going to want to be ready for the new content. You don't want to keep doing the old stuff. So just, I get the whole long-winded thing is just be patient and nice to one another, right? Because if you don't take the time, and like I was doing, you watched me do optimization earlier, right? We had like 5 people in the group who were like, I've never done these uptime strats. I'll just leave. And we were like, no.
Fine.
If we don't teach you this, then nobody will know it. So let's take the time and expand our pool.
I love to say that about all content. You have somebody in a dungeon who's just doing something wrong. Instead of being like, hey, you're an idiot, be like, hey, did you know that if you do it this way, then this, and this works, and you won't die? Now they know, and now they won't do that to everyone else, and now they teach other people. Yes.
Those who walk before need those who walk after. I mean, come on. This is what we're supposed to do as a community.
No, I mean, it's true.
Because tomorrow was never promised.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's always the possibility as well that people don't want to hear it and don't want your advice. And I always say to everybody, I'm like, that's fine. If you say, hey, can I give you a tip? And somebody says no.
Report them.
Report them. Get them banned from the game.
We don't want that crap in our game. No.
No, but I mean, I always tell people, I'm like, we are all allowed to say no at any point for any reason. Like, you can just say no, and then if they don't align with whatever the group value is, whatever the thing is, you know, you can be like, well, hey, well, maybe that, if you're static, right? You know, be like, maybe then you're looking for like a different group, or, you know, have a conversation. Sometimes you just get through a run of a dungeon or whatever it is, or you just leave the party, you know, if you're in like a pug and you're like, oh, I don't think this is going to be a productive time or fun time for me. And like, I apologize everybody, but I think I'm going to step out, you know? So it's a weird time, and with imbalance in these regards, we do see that affect people and make them more frustrated more easily, and a lot of things like that. So yeah, Ren, I love what you said. Patience,
well put.
and
Look, I've been mad about Summoner since the media tour.
It's true.
Absolutely, since the first moment I got to play it, I was like, this is cool, but it's a lot. It's sound and fury signifying nothing, I think.
I actually leveled it up because I liked it.
I like the way
mean,
that it
it's
plays.
fun.
I wanted
Yeah.
one job that I didn't have to think about, but
Yes.
could also help recover a moment if I
Yeah.
had to.
And
I
that's what it is good for.
Yeah, I like the core concept of the redesign.
Sure.
I think it embodies the summoner
Sure.
aspect so much better.
Oh,
It's
that part? Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
there's
just,
definitely other critiques though.
as I said, I wrote, I don't know, 19,000 words or something about every single job. It's all on Gamerscape, and you can see how wrong I was, right? Because it was the media tour. We were all wrong.
That's true.
But I said, and I quote, "It's great, but if this is a reclassification as the easiest caster, I don't want it."
I'm going to
that's
tell
what
you
it
what
was.
I wanted for Summoner real quick
Yeah.
before we leave.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my idea for Summoner was I wanted like a Shiva or a Thornton situation where
Oh.
for a little bit you become
Yeah.
Absolutely.
a
That
primal.
evoker.
You did as well,
Yeah,
didn't
you
you?
evoke your
Yep,
own
I did.
Aether, right? I think that would be the coolest thing. How cool would it be if you had a little tiny Lalafell horse and you were like Odin, but you're like a Rogadin?
Yeah. I mean, and we have 16 in which there seems to be evoking as a concept, and it would be
I
a
hope
nice
16's
dovetail.
a shard of 14.
I hope so.
Yeah,
too.
same,
Oh my
same,
goodness. Oh, we maybe we should talk about that on the show one of these days. Just
Yeah.
have you on, talk about the future. I don't know. It'd
All
be
the
fun. This is the
similarities
first
and stuff.
time, and I already can't wait for you to be on the show again. So
Oh, well, thank you. It was a pleasure. I had a great time.
Well.
So did we. Thanks for joining us.
I was gonna say earlier, conversely to Altino, if
Mhm.
I'm always on open mics while we're
Yeah.
raiding, so you'll hear everything I say all the time. And if you ever hear me sigh, it's because I forgot to breathe.
Oh,
Not
okay.
because-
Not because you're fed up.
No, I'm not even kidding. I'll like sometimes just forget to breathe. Right. Okay, breathing again, doing that. Yep.
Yeah. No, I'm so mad at myself when I raid that I don't even look at anyone else. They'll tell you, they have to tell me if someone dies. Because I'm just so focused. I'm like, no, I got to get this GCD. Can I fit that in?
You like go to the
you're working on
bathroom
time.
after you're like, you embarrass me.
Not quite. I'm just
You
like,
lost your cast.
Yeah. You joke. But yeah, I am that spreadsheet gamer. I go back into the imaginary abacus and I go, did I line that up? I deleted.
I
crap.
really should have
Yeah.
used Ifrit before Garuda, and then I missed
Yep.
the gap closer, and I just
Mhm. Yep,
delayed
but-
Phoenix by 6 seconds.
Oh boy. But that's a thing, there's always something to focus on with yourself, right? Don't make it external first. You can always fix something with yourself. You can always figure out a new way to get around a mechanic, right? Oh, can I stand here? Oh, these squares. Ren, he taught me about the squares. Can I make that work for me? You know what I
The
mean?
P6 stuff? Absolutely.
Yeah,
dude.
exactly.
Absolutely. It's so good.
Yeah.
That
so
arena's so powerful.
even if the group that you're in isn't to your specifications, but they're working on it and they're getting better, you can still get better. I don't care if you're ranked number one.
Sometimes the parties where people are like, I'm just practicing a strat, and you're like, okay, that's fine. That's the best time to be like, I'm agreed the shit out of this,
Yeah,
and let's see
exactly.
what we can get away with.
Exactly.
Because if
Let's
we
find
wipe,
out.
it's their fault.
Exactly.
Whoopsie.
But yeah, I think that's all.
All right. Well, then let's do that whole contact information shank.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, our beloved Fusion X is not here today, but if you want to find him, you can at Roffeldurg, ROFLDRG, Twitter,
Mhm.
Twitch, and YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Zanidra_A, on Twitch at Strawberry Bop, or plus the word, underscore one the number,
One the number.
underscore shot the word, and also YouTube at +1 shot with no underscores. And that is the D&D podcast that Altino and I and a bunch of other people do. We have a show tonight. It's D&D Diablo. We're going to go through the world of Diablo 2 as some crazy people.
Oh,
and
it's
then
fun.
we have another one tomorrow we just started up who is run by our friend Joe Chat. And it's a Power Rangers game. We're going to be Power Rangers.
We're teens with
That's
attitudes.
sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's gonna be great.
Amazing.
So expect terribly wonderful one-liners and a lot of posing.
Mhm. Yes.
Yes. All right. Charles, where can we find you?
Here and only here, like I say, every single week, because I don't stream or anything. Still working on my OnlyFans. I lost some content because I was just going to write a whole manifesto about balance, but now, I've gone through it and now I never have to talk about it again. I'm so happy that we had this show. I wanted to do it last week so I never have to talk about it again because I'm just so done.
Until next
So done.
batch.
Exactly. But here and only here, and also plus the word one, the number shot, the word on YouTube, and there's underscores on Twitch. We're thinking about maybe doing some 1D&D playtesting at some point too. So if you're interested in that,
That's a thing.
maybe stay tuned.
All right.
So Rook,
Oh, hi. It's me, Rookery. You can find me on Twitch at Rookery, Rookuri, on YouTube as well, and on Twitter at Rookery_. You all know me. I play a lot of games, but mostly Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2. If I'm not talking about it or playing it live on my stream, I'm probably chatting on one of the 2 podcasts that I do, Aetheryte Radio and also the Lightbringers podcast. And I've been doing a lot of shoutcasting, so as always, keep an eye out on various things for future appearances, special appearances. We did a Guild Wars 2 cooking stream for the 10th anniversary in collaboration with them recently. All kinds of stuff, so keep an eye out. But no matter what we're doing, we're always, sharing about the games we love.
Okay.
and now.
And of course, you can find us,
Hi.
collectible us. I'll leave you last because best for
Yeah,
last.
we're gonna give you the most time.
Yeah, most time. Best for last. Collectively, all of us, Aetheryte Radio, gamerscape.com. Please email us if you have questions or comments or, like, I don't know, cool pictures of cake and cats and stuff. And Aetheryte Radio on Twitter. And then, of course, we work for Gamerscape, and you can find us at Gamerscape on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook. And we have a Discord, discord.gg/gamerscape. And we have a bunch of channels in there. And we love to interact with people, so come talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
And now, without further ado, you know what's really great is I put us on a different screen, so we're rolling back to this visage right here. So please let us know where we can find you and what you're up to right now.
Well, hey, gosh golly darn it. I'm Rin Karagani, and you could find me over at wherever those places are. I have Rin Karagani at Twitch and Twitter and YouTube. It's all the same. And you can't find me at Bird of Chess, and you can't find me at Plus One Shot, all the words. You can't find me at any of those places, but maybe in the future you could find me here again.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Yes, we would love it.
Hey, we do.
You can find me over on The Balance. Gunbreaker Mentor there. If you ever have any questions, you can send me a Discord message personally. That's actually how a lot of people contact me. Or just come by stream, where we do a lot of teaching parties for Savage and Ultimates. Less Ultimates lately because the tier is new. And yeah, I'm a nerd. I do stuff.
And once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Giving us your very expert opinion on this topic. We often have the issue where we're all like, and none of us play tanks, so we don't know how that works. So that was really great too.
I was prepared to do a filibuster about balance, but I really don't want to. I don't want to.
Listen.
My job is numbers and this sort of thing, and I don't want to do it.
I know that Tanks got the loudest voice in this last Savage, and it's because tanks are better than everything else. It's just that's how it is. Listen.
Wow.
My goodness.
Without tanks, you wouldn't be able to do the raids.
I mean, that's true.
You're not wrong.
Sure.
That's true.
No, all the jobs are pretty cool, but tanks
The healers
I think,
are the best.
hurting most.
So I think we all decided.
I would say tanks are probably the ones who are the loudest right now because they were the closest to being perfectly balanced.
Yeah, they were good.
Right.
They were good.
But every time it's like Astro's too strong or too weak, or Scholar's too strong or too weak.
Yeah.
The DPS are all over the place.
All
so like
over the place.
tanks were happy.
They're the rock.
And then they weren't.
Yeah.
Enough to lose your hair.
My goodness. All right. Well, that is going to do us for today then. We'll see you guys next week. I don't know what we're doing. We'll figure it out, though, and we'll let you know.
Yeah, it's true.
All right. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.